is that the combination of the above has led to the forcible displacement of millions of peoples and created unprecedented waves of refugees and migratory flows, which exert huge economic and social pressures on all countries and regions affected. Unfortunately, and we have to be honest with ourselves, selfish interests hinder the founding principles of the United Nations, in which the humanity has vested its hope for a prosperous and peaceful future. In order to achieve this objective, there is only one answer: multilateralism, tangible solidarity, and stronger partnership based on positive agenda. It is for this reason that we lend our unwavering support to the reform and revitalization priorities of the Secretary General, which aim to reinforce the effectiveness of the organization and further advance peacekeeping and peace-building, humanitarian assistance, and long-term development growth. Distinguished friends, what I have just referred to is by no means meant to belittle the numerous achievements of the work of the United Nations. My remarks and observations aim to emphasize the need to transform via reforms an organization that will give real hope to those in need of international protection, to the quest for collective security, peace, and development. In other words, to turn the United Nations in a much more effective organization. Distinguished friends, my strong and honest words are not unintentional. I stand here before you representing a country which regrettably still endures the consequences of the blatant violation of the fundamental principles of the United Nations as a result of the 1974 illegal military invasion of Turkey and the ongoing occupation. Ever since, both the United Nations General Assembly and the Security Council have issued numerous decisions and resolutions calling on Turkey to end the illegal occupation and withdraw its occupying troops, establishing at the same time the basis for reaching a comprehensive solution to the Cyprus problem. Decisions and resolutions which in the absence of resolve and the necessary means for the implementation thereof have led to the audacity of the invader who tries to be portrayed as a victim instead of the perpetrator it actually is. Distinguished friends, it is not my intention to engage on a blame game, but I cannot leave unnoticed the absurdity of the Turkish rhetoric, which lies in their claim that the efforts for a compromise have been exhausted and the focus should now be on reaching a settlement based on the so-called realities on the ground. Let me remind you what the true realities on the ground are. Is it not a fact that 37% of the territory of the Republic of Cyprus, an EU member state, remains under Turkish military occupation with more than 40,000 troops still on the ground? Is it not a fact that after the Turkish invasion, 1/3 of the Greek Cypriots were forced to leave their ancestral homes? Is not a fact that while the Turkish Cypriots owned approximately 14% of the private-owned land, today they usurped 37% of the island? Is it not a fact that they looted churches, destroyed archaeological sites and thousands of years of cultural heritage? Is not a fact that they have killed thousands of people and embarked on all kinds of atrocities, and still today almost 1,000 persons are missing? Is not a fact that they have implanted hundreds of thousands of Turkish nationals to the occupied areas, thus sternly altering the demographic character of the island, turning the Turkish Cypriots into minority in the areas they occupy? Is it not a fact that they have never implemented the 1975 agreement on the status of the enclaved persons, then more than 23,000, while today the number are only 350? Is it not a fact that the above crimes, all the above crimes, have been condemned by the European Court of Human Rights and the Council of Europe in plethora of decisions, with Turkey failing to comply with even one ruling? Is it not a fact that Turkey has established an illegal entity in the occupied areas, which is under its absolute political, economic, societal, cultural and religious control? A control which is also denounced by the majority of Turkish Cypriots, an illegal entity described by the European Court of Human Rights as a subordinate local administration of Turkey. It is not a fact that Turkey tries to equate the state, the international recognized Republic of Cyprus, member of the United Nations and the European Union, with the illegal secessionist entity? It is not a fact that the above proclamation of the purported cessation has been condemned by the Security Council and considered legal invalid? And it is not a fact that the Security Council called for its reversal, and for all the states and the international community as a whole not to accept it or in any way assist it? Is not a fact that recently, with the presence of President Erdogan in Cyprus, they are trying to change the status of the defense city of Famagusta, contrary to the UN Security Council resolutions and the condemnation of the international community? Ladies and gentlemen, during his address at the General Assembly on Tuesday, the President of Turkey, Mr. Erdogan, stated, and I quote, "We hope that the problems regarding maritime boundary, the limitations, will be resolved with the framework of international law and good neighborly relations." And really, I am wondering as to which international law Mr. Erdogan refers to. Is it not a fact that Turkey refuses to ratify and abide by the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which codifies relevant customary international law? How Mr. Erdogan understands the settlement of disputes connecting the limitations? Is he referring to Turkey's own arbitrary interpretation of international law, which reduces the exclusive economic zone of Cyprus by 44% at the expense of both Greek and Turkish Cypriots? President Erdogan also spoke of the need of maintaining good neighborly relations. And I wonder yet again, which country had invaded and to date still occupies Cyprus? Which country invaded Syria? Which country violates the sovereignty of Iraq? Which country intervenes in the internal affairs of Libya? Which country violates the sovereign rights of Greece? And which country interfered in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict? Excellencies, the narrative also put forward by the Turkish side, according to which all efforts to reaching a compromise have failed, and therefore we should seek solutions outside the UN framework, reinforces the valid arguments that Turkey and endgame is not to solve the Cyprus problem, but to turn Cyprus into its protectorate. And I will elaborate. In his report of the 28th September 2017 about the outcome of the conference on Cyprus at Grand Montana, on paragraph 27, the UN Secretary General correctly assessed that all internal elements included in his six-point framework were almost or about to solved. Thus, whilst the aim of the Secretary General to reach a strategic agreement was within close reach, the reason of the unsuccessful outcome was Turkey's inflexible stance and insistence on maintaining the anachronistic Treaty of Guarantee, the right of intervention, and the permanent presence of troops. Furthermore, following the conference at Grand Montana, in line with our commitment to resume the peace process, both leaders, I myself and my counterpart, the Turkish Cypriot, and the Secretary General reached a joint understanding on November 25th, 2019, as to the principles which should guide the resumption of a new round of negotiations, namely the joint declaration of 2014, convergences reached so far, and the six-point framework presented by the UN Secretary General at Grand Montana. Following the above, one would expect the next step to be the resumption of the negotiations. Nevertheless, with Turkish objectives being different, we witness blatant intervention of Turkey to oust the leader of the Turkish Cypriot community with whom the above joint understanding was reached. The evident goal was for him to be replaced by a new leadership which reproduces and adopts Turkey's position for changing the agreed basis for a settlement, with the ultimate goal being a two-state solution. Thus, it is clear why a compromise is not possible to reach when one side deviates from the UN framework or annuls agreements reached and aspires to a different form of settlement contrary to the agreed basis and the good office's mandate of the Secretary General. Ladies and gentlemen, part of the Turkish agenda is also the creation of a new fait accompli on the ground in Famagusta, in full contravention and violation of the relevant UN Security Council resolutions, and in particular 550 and 789. All such actions are clearly intended to destroy the prospects of a settlement based on the agreed UN framework. Dear friends, compromise becomes even more difficult to reach when new ideas put forward by our side, as asked by the Secretary General, and in an effort to move the process forward, are blatantly rejected. I have proposed the decentralization of the exercise of power, which we deem as the appropriate balance between the enhancement of the constituent state's essential role and the unhindered functioning of the state, including at international level. I have also flagged our willingness to consider the option of a parliamentary system with ceremonial head of state and rotating prime minister. And more recently, I have even extended an invitation to the Turkish Cypriots to rejoin the state institutions established by the 1960 of the Republic of Cyprus, thus fully implementing mutatis mutandis its relevant provisions. It's going without saying that such an invitation is not meant to be an alternative to the agreed basis of the settlement. It is meant to ease the Turkish Cypriot community back into the state, pending a final settlement, provided a strategic agreement is reached, thus fully participating in the evolution of the Republic of Cyprus into a federal state. This proposal should also be assessed in conjunction with the package of game-changing, win-win, confidence-building measures I proposed last December and unfortunately rejected by the Turkish side. Confidence-building measures which are on the table even now. Ladies and gentlemen, what I would like is to assure you that about my determination to set negotiation process back on track on the basis of the UN framework and the agreement reached in Berlin on November 25th, 2019. For us, there is only one plan: to reach a settlement on the basis of a bizonal, bicommunal federation with political equality as set out in relevant UN Security Council resolutions and in line with the principles on which the EU is founded. A settlement that will lead to a functional and viable state without the obsolete system of guarantees, the right of intervention, the presence of Turkish troops, or any kind of foreign dependencies. A settlement that will equally benefit all Cypriots, Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots, fully respecting their human rights and contributing to the peace and stability of the region. My extensive reference to the Cyprus problem, dear friends, aims at highlighting the need to address the realities and issues before us on the basis of values and principles of international law and not on the basis of the law arbitrarily interpreted by powerful. Excellencies, the chosen theme of this year's General Assembly, building resilience through hope, to recover from COVID-19, rebuild sustainability, respond to the needs of the planet, respect the rights of people, and revitalize the United Nations is of course very timely and relevant to the momentous challenges that we need to tackle. As our actions are interconnected and have an impact on one another, we, all the nations of the world, made a collective pledge to the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals so as to address universal challenges on which I have already alluded to for the benefit of humankind. At the same time, we must also all realize that we are at a defining moment, I don't know, it's the same, I think, as regards climate change. Taking into account the alarming projections concerning the impact of climate change on our immediate region, namely the Eastern Mediterranean and the greater Middle East, Cyprus has undertaken a coordinating role for developing a regional action plan consisting of two distinct components, a scientific and subsequently an intergovernmental one. Ladies and gentlemen, it would be amiss if I don't refer to the recent developments in Afghanistan. We share a collective responsibility to uphold international humanitarian law, particularly as regards the protection of women and minorities. We also need to ensure that Afghanistan does not become a safe haven for terrorism and extremism, or a breeding ground for organized crime, weapons and drug trafficking, and renewed waves of migration. Another region, ladies and gentlemen, which is also considered synonymous with discord and strife, is the Middle East and North Africa. In this regard, Cyprus, as a strong proponent of the ideal that the Eastern Mediterranean and the greater Middle East can become an area of stability, peace and cooperation, strives to actively promote an enhanced network of regional cooperation. Distinguished friends, in concluding, please allow me to stress that in a fragmented and multipolar world, we have more than ever a moral, ethical, and political duty to promote the essence of human civilization, unite our strength to maintain international peace and security, and establish conditions that can bring prosperity and welfare to all. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Cyprus for the statement just made, and I request the protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Muhammadu Buhari, President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. I request the protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Muhammadu Buhari, President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, and invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Heads of State and Government, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, let me, on behalf of the government and people of Nigeria, congratulate you on your well-deserved election as President of the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly. I would like to assure you of the full support and cooperation of the Nigerian delegation throughout your tenure. I would like to commend your predecessor, His Excellency Mr. Volkan Bashir, for the many remarkable achievements recorded during his tenure despite the challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. Permit me to congratulate the Secretary General Antonio Guterres on his re-election and commend his strong commitment to making the United Nations more alive to its responsibilities. I also want to express my gratitude to him for reappointing Ms. Amina Mohammed as the Deputy Secretary General to assist him in discharging his responsibilities. Mr. President, excuse me, the theme of this year's General Assembly, Building Silence, Resilience through Hope to Recover from COVID-19, Rebuild Sustainability, Respond to Needs of the Planet, Respect the Rights of the People, and Revitalize the United Nations sums up our common desire to rescue our planet, recover our economies, and restore hope to all the peoples of the world. In this regard, my delegation will continue to support the United Nations as the indispensable forum for international cooperation and the cornerstone of the multilateral system rooted in respect for international law, including international human rights law, and predicated on a rules-based order. Mr. President, I want to thank the international community for the concerted response to COVID-19, the solidarity and the drive to contain the first truly global health emergency of our time is a pointer to the many things we can achieve if we work together. On our part, Nigeria has made strenuous efforts to contain the virus and hold its deadly onslaught on our people. Our efforts have been rewarded with moderate success. At the outset, we recognize detection and contact tracing to be important tools in combating the virus. In this connection, from a mere 4 laboratories with testing and detection capacities, we ramped up the facilities to over 140 centers today. Similarly, we built isolation centers and emergency hospitals wards in record time all over the country. We carry out genomic sequencing in designated laboratories across the country with a view to detecting variants in circulation. In addition, over 40,000 healthcare workers have recently been trained on infection, prevention, and control measures with the support of various partners. Nigeria remains grateful for the assistance received from our partners and friends all over the world. Vaccination is the key to our safe emergence from the pandemic. We fully support the COVAX initiative, from which we have benefited. We also thank the United States of America, Turkey, India, China, European Union, and others for the vaccines provided. Despite the acknowledgement, however, I would like to reiterate my call for a fairer and more equitable distribution of vaccines in all countries so that together we can fight and contain the pandemic. The rising wave of newer and more contagious strains makes this even more urgent. No country can afford the socio-economic implications of prolonged shutdown. It is imperative to underscore that no one is safe until everyone is safe. Mr. President, Nigeria remains deeply concerned over the illicit trade, transfer, and circulation of small arms and light weapons. Their excessive accumulation and uncontrolled spread in many regions of the world are having devastating humanitarian and socio-economic consequences, especially on the continent of Africa. It is on this note that my delegation calls for the worldwide application of the Arms Trade Treaty to codify accountability in conventional arms trade, which is critical to the security of nations. This is in recognition of the need for a broad-based global partnership in the ongoing battle against transborder crimes, including terrorism and piracy. Mr. President, we must deal not only with the symptoms of conflict, but also the immediate causes that fuel conflicts in the first place. These include poor and undemocratic governance, human rights abuses, poverty, ignorance, injustice, and inequalities. There are no easy solutions to these conditions. They require long-term investments and more effective international cooperation. In this connection, my delegation underscores the importance of promoting peaceful, unfettered, and inclusive participation of states in global actions towards conflict prevention. This will facilitate the achievement of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the African Union Agenda 2063. In West Africa especially, our democratic gains of the past decades are now being eroded. The recent trend of unconstitutional takeover of power, sometimes in reaction to unilateral changes of constitution by some leaders, must not be tolerated by the international community. Nigeria fully supports the efforts of ECOWAS to address this growing challenge and appreciates the support of both the African Union and the United Nations. In this regard, I would like to reiterate that as leaders of our individual member states, we need to adhere to constitutional provisions of our countries, particularly on term limits. This is one area that generates crisis and political tension in our sub-region. Mr. President, Nigeria is fully committed to nuclear non-proliferation and has always supported the view that it should involve all states. Disarmament conventions deserve the support of all states, small, large, nuclear, or non-nuclear. Nuclear weapons remain the ultimate agents of mass destruction, and their total elimination should be the final objective of all disarmament processes within the broad spectrum of goals being pursued by the United Nations. In this regard, Nigeria would participate actively in forthcoming review conference of nuclear prohibition treaty and also the first meeting of states parties to the landmark treaty on the provision of nuclear weapons, scheduled to take place within the first quarter of 2022. Nigeria regards these upcoming events as important steps towards realization of a world free of nuclear weapons. We are therefore supportive of any diplomatic efforts in this direction. We hope that the upcoming Nuclear Prohibition Treaty Review Conference would lead to a successful outcome that will facilitate the nuclearization of the world. We will do our part to ensure such an outcome. Mr. President, terrorism continues to dominate security discourse worldwide. In Nigeria, Boko Haram, terrorist group, though fragmented by internal strife and weakened by our defense forces, is still active and preying on soft targets. Nigeria will continue to work closely with United Nations counter-terrorism bodies and entities with a view to bringing this scourge to an end. Nigeria has spared no effort in addressing the challenges of terrorism posed by the activities of Boko Haram in northeast Nigeria, the Lake Chad region, as well as banditry in the northwest and north central. Mr. President, the impact of climate change is already with us in Nigeria, manifesting in various ways: conflict trigger, food insecurity, drying up of lakes, loss of livelihood, and youth migration, among others. The trend is the same in many other countries that are threatened by forest fires, rising seas, drought, and desertification. As leaders, we must create inclusive and gender-sensitive policies that address all issues connected to climate action for mitigation and resilience. This is why we are working on a transition to low-carbon economy consistent with achieving the Paris Climate Agreement on the Sustainable Development Goals. Mr. President, combating illicit financial flows and ensuring the recovery and return of illicitly acquired assets have the potential to provide resources in the immediate term for financing development in the area of COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. It drives national governments of resources needed to provide adequate and meaningful sources of livelihood for their citizens. The latter gives rise to more irregular migration patterns and unwholesome consequences for interstate and human relations. Mr. President, the issue of debt, we have seen that developing countries have been faced with unsustainable debt burdens even before the pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic has increased the risk of a new wave of deepening debt where vital public financial resources are allocated to external debt servicing and payments at the expense of domestic health and financing for critical development needs. Therefore, there is an urgent need to consider expansion and extension of debt service suspension initiative to include all developing, least developed countries, and small island developing states facing fiscal and liquidity challenges. Mr. President, Nigeria reaffirms that international trade is an engine for development and sustained economic growth, as well as global eradication of poverty. We therefore call for the reform agenda that will engender better recovery from this crisis, build resilience to future shocks, and pursue transformative development strategies that can deliver the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Mr. President, the global food system has in recent times been impacted by several factors such as population growth, availability and accessibility of arable land and water resources, climate change and loss of biodiversity. Climate change and unpredictable shocks, such as the current global pandemic, further exacerbate vulnerabilities in the global food system, requiring the United Nations urgent attention. Mr. President, Nigeria has been steadfast in safeguarding human rights, including the advancement of women, the protection of children, the protection of the rights of people living with disabilities, the treatment of migrants, refugees, returnees, and displaced persons, as well as the promotion of fundamental freedoms through all legitimate means. In this regard, my delegation recommends the positive example of leaders like Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand. The recent rise in hate-related crimes globally underscores the urgent need to continue our engagement about racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and other related intolerance. It is sad to note that the issue of racism remains alive globally. We are beginning to forget our affirmation of the inherent dignity and the equal and inalienable rights of every individual as enshrined in the United Nations Charter. No society can claim to be free or just if it is deprived of any one of these rights. Today, racism drives hate crimes and institutional discrimination. In all this, Africans and people of African descent are among the major victims. I am confident that this forum will make significant impact in the quest to end race-related vices and injustice. Mr. President, no reform of the United Nations system is more urgent than that of Security Council. Stakeholders around the world are asking how such power could be concentrated in scant representation. The governmental negotiations have taken too long, some 15 years. We must avoid going in circles. Consensus has been achieved in some of the elements of this reform, especially that of the representation of Africa on the basis of the El-Zuwini Consensus and the Sartre Declaration. It is unreasonable to expect unanimity in this matter. Mr. President, our organization is at the peak of the multilateral system. It is also the preeminent body for solving our current and emerging challenges and for developing norms that are protective of us all. In the current moment, hope for this is dependent on how we assist each other to get COVID-19 out of all countries, regardless of their classification. We can do and we must do. In this regard, let me close my statement by paying special tribute to a great and humane internationalist and an exemplary practitioner of multilateral cooperation. I am speaking of Chancellor Angela Merkel of the Federal Republic of Germany. As she exits the stage, we wish her well. Thank you.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria for the statement just made, and I request the protocol to escort His Excellency. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lebanon to introduce an address by the head of state.
Thank you. السيد الرئيس رئيس الجمعية العامة للأمم المتحدة، السيدة أمينة محمد نائبة الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة، أصحاب السعادة ممثلو الوفود الكرام، إنه لمن دواعي سروري أن أقدم هذا البيان المسجل لفخامة رئيس الجمهورية اللبنانية العماد ميشيل عون في هذا النقاش العام بالدورة 76 للجمعية العامة للأمم المتحدة. شكرا يا سيد الرئيس.
معالي السيد عبد الله شاهد
His Excellency Abdullah Shahid, President of the General Assembly, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by congratulating you, Mr. President, on assuming the presidency of the 76th session of the UN General Assembly, and wish you the best in your role, which you assume as the world seeks to recover from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. It would have been my pleasure to congratulate you in person had it not been for the global health situation which made it necessary for me to join you today through a pre-recorded video. I would also like to thank His Excellency Volkan Bozkir for his able leadership of last year's session. My congratulations also go to His Excellency Antonio Guterres for his re-election to the helm of the United Nations. I thank him for his efforts in support of Lebanon and for helping organize 3 conferences to support the Lebanese people in the aftermath of the catastrophic explosion at Beirut port. I express my appreciation to all heads of state and government who took part in those conferences, and to governmental and non-governmental organizations and others that offered to help. My gratitude specifically goes to France, whose president rushed to Lebanon to stand with us in the midst of this tragedy. Finally, I thank our friends and allies who assisted our armed forces. Our army is entrusted with the heavy task of fighting terrorism and cooperates with UNIFIL to maintain peace and stability along our southern borders in implementation of Security Council Resolution 1701. Ladies and gentlemen, 20 years ago, just a few miles from the UN headquarters, one of the largest terrorist attacks hit the heart of New York City, causing thousands of deaths and injuries, and leaving deep wounds in our collective psyche. The impact of that attack echoed throughout the world and set in motion a global war on terror. The war had a mixed track record, and at every turn, many nations, especially in our region, paid a heavy price for that war, which resulted in death, destruction, and displacement. Today, those same nations are trying to recover and bounce back, just like New York did. Because in the face of terrorism, the will to live will always prevail. This is the exact meaning of this debate's theme, building resilience through hope. Distinguished guests, a new Lebanese government has been formed in line with the constitution, following more than a year of political turmoil. With this, Lebanon enters a new phase, one we hope will lead us to recovery. The new government will undoubtedly have to confront major domestic and external challenges if it is to gain the trust of its people and the world after winning the confidence of the Parliament. The past 2 years have been some of the most challenging in Lebanon's history. A chain explosion of protracted and emerging crises affected all sectors. A decades-long rentier-style financial and economic policy, coupled with corruption and waste, and driven by financial mismanagement and lack of accountability, led Lebanon into an unprecedented financial and monetary crisis. The result was economic contraction, inhumane living conditions, and rising levels of unemployment, migration, and poverty. The government has declared its commitment to implement urgently needed financial and economic reforms, to combat corruption, and adopt a financial recovery plan as part of the negotiations with the IMF. This would be coupled with efforts to create a public social safety net and reform and, if necessary, restructure the banking sector and ensure the full implementation of the electricity sector plan. As a first step, the government has completed all the required procedures and launched a forensic audit of the Central Bank of Lebanon. This audit will cover all public accounts. With this, I will have fulfilled my commitment to the Lebanese people and the international community to uphold transparency and accountability. We now look to the international community to finance some of the most vital public and private sector projects necessary to revive the economy and create jobs. We also seek the international community's assistance to recover smuggled funds and the proceeds of corruption. Ladies and gentlemen, our problems have been further compounded by wars in the region, especially the war in Syria, which has had a spillover effect on Lebanon. The blockade on Syria isolated Lebanon, and the conflict there fueled terrorism in our country. Large waves of Syrians have swept Lebanon, with numbers exceeding 1.5 million people to date.
Earlier this month, I laid out a six-part plan for the fall that does just that. 1, vaccinate the unvaccinated, including with new requirements. 2, keep the vaccinated protected. 3, keep children safe and schools open. 4, increase testing and masking. 5, protect our economic recovery. And 6, improve the care for people with COVID-19. Now, we made important progress on each front. And this week, as planned, we took a key step in protecting the vaccinated with booster shots, which our top government doctors believe provides the highest level of protection available to date. The Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, they've completed their independent scientific review. And based on that review, the majority of Americans who were fully vaccinated with the Pfizer vaccine are now able to receive the booster shot 6 months after they've received their second shot. 6 months after you receive the second shot, you're eligible. Those eligible include, in addition to meeting the requirement of 6 months after the second shot, those people that are 65 years or older, adults 18 and over with certain underlying health conditions like diabetes and obesity, and those who are at increased risk of COVID-19 because of where they work or where they live, like healthcare workers, teachers, grocery store workers. That group makes up 60 million Americans who are now eligible for a booster 6 months after their second shot. And up to 20 million who received their earlier Pfizer shot at least 6 months ago are eligible today. So those those folks are eligible now. And I've made clear all along, the decision of which booster shot to give, when to start the shot, and who will get them is left to the scientists and the doctors. That's what happened here. And while we waited and prepared, we bought enough booster shots, and states and pharmacies, doctors' offices, and community health centers have been preparing to get shots in arms, booster shots in arms, for a while. And like your first and second shot, the booster shot is free and easily accessible. Booster shots will be available in 80,000 locations, including over 40,000 pharmacies nationwide. So, my message today is this. If you've got the Pfizer vaccine, if you got the Pfizer vaccine in January, February, or March of this year, and you're over 65 years of age, go get the booster. Or if you're have a medical condition like diabetes, or you're a frontline worker like a healthcare worker or a teacher, you can get a free booster now. I'll be getting my booster shot. It's hard to acknowledge I'm over 65, but I'll be getting my booster shot. It's a bear, isn't it? I tell you, acknowledge. Anyway, but all kidding aside, I'll be getting my booster shot. I'm not sure exactly when I'm going to do it, as soon as I can get it done. Of course, millions of Americans got the Moderna and Johnson & Johnson vaccines. My message for you is this. You still have a high degree of protection. Our doctors and scientists are working day and night to analyze the data from those two organizations on whether and when you need a booster shot. And we'll provide updates for you as the process moves ahead. Again, the bottom line is, if you're fully vaccinated, you're highly protected from severe illness, even if you get COVID-19. In fact, recent data indicates there's only one confirmed positive case per 5,000 fully vaccinated Americans per day. You're as safe as possible. You're in good shape. And we're doing everything we can to keep it that way, which is where the booster comes in. So let me be clear. Yes, we've made incredible progress in vaccinating Americans, with over 182 million people being fully vaccinated as of today. But this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. And it's caused by the fact that despite Americans having an unprecedented and successful vaccination program, despite the fact that for almost 5 months, free vaccines have been available in 80,000 locations, we still have over 70 million Americans who have failed to get a single shot. And to make matters worse, there are elected officials actively working to undermine with false information the fight against COVID-19. This is totally unacceptable. The vast majority of Americans are doing the right thing. 3/4 of the eligible have gotten at least one shot, but 1/4 has not gotten any. And in a country as large as ours, that's 25% minority, can cause an awful lot of damage, and they are causing a lot of damage. The unvaccinated overcrowd our hospitals, overrunning emergency rooms and intensive care units, leaving no room for someone with a heart attack or a cancer operation needed to get the life-saving care, because the places where they would get that care are crowded. They are not available. The unvaccinated also put our economy at recovery at risk, causing unease in the economy causing unease around the kitchen table. I can imagine what's going on in the conversations this morning, and a lot of parents wondering what's going to happen. What's going to happen? Those who have been vaccinated, what's going to happen? Potentially slowing economic growth, costing jobs. The refusal has cost all of us. The refusal to get vaccinated has cost all of us. And I'm moving forward with vaccination requirements wherever I can. These requirements will cover 2/3 of all workers in America. And I'm pleased to see more businesses and organizations instituting their own vaccination requirements. I've had business leaders call me and thank me for setting the policies to allow them to do the same thing. They are able to do it anyway, but it gives them the ability to move forward. We're making progress. For example, United Airlines, which required vaccines about 7 weeks ago, now has 97% of their employees vaccinated. Just 4 weeks ago, the Department of Defense required vaccinations for the military, and already 92% of our active duty service members are vaccinated. And we're on track to administer 24 million shots in arms in September. So please, do the right thing. Do the right thing. And I understand there's a lot of misinformation you've been fed out there. But try to look through, get to people you trust, the people who've been vaccinated. Ask them. Ask them. So get vaccinated. But don't just take it from me. Listen to the voices of the unvaccinated Americans who are lying in hospital beds, taking their final breath saying, and literally we've seen this on television, if only I'd gotten vaccinated. If only. If only. They're leaving behind husbands and wives, small children, people who adore them. People are dying and will die who don't have to die. It is not hyperbole to suggest it's literally a tragedy. Please don't let this become your tragedy. Get vaccinated. It can save your life. It can save the lives of those around you. You know, text your zip code to 438829. 438829, or visit vaccines.gov to find a vaccination location near you now. Let me close with this. We also made so much progress during the past 8 months in this pandemic, and now we face a critical moment. We have the tools, we have the plan, we just have to finish the job together as one nation. And I know we can. I know we can. God bless you all, and please look out for your own self-interest and health here. Get vaccinated. May God protect our troops. Thank you. ABC, Rachel Scott.
Thank you, Mr. President. You said on the campaign trail that you were going to restore the moral standing of the U.S., that you were going to immediately end Trump's assault on the dignity of immigrant communities. Given what we saw at the border this week, have you failed in that promise? And this is happening under your watch. Do you take responsibility for the chaos that's unfolding?
Of course I take responsibility. I'm president, but it was horrible what to see, as you saw. To see people treated like they did, horses barely running them over, people being strapped, it's outrageous. I promise you those people will pay. They will be, an investigation underway now, and there will be consequences. There will be consequences. It's an embarrassment, but it's beyond an embarrassment. It's dangerous. It's wrong. It sends the wrong message around the world. It sends the wrong message at home. It's simply not who we are. Thank you. Peter Alexander.
Mr. President, thank you. You came into office on a message of competence and unity. We've witnessed what's happened in the country over the course of the last several months. We've seen the chaotic troop withdrawal from Afghanistan, the threat of a government shutdown right now, and Democrats, members of your own party, are still divided over your agenda going forward. So what do you say to Americans who say that you have not delivered on that promise?
Remember, I said it's going to take me a year to deliver everything I'm looking at here. That's number one. Number two, take a look at what I inherited when I came into office. The state of affairs and where we were. We had 4 million people vaccinated. We had no plan. I could go down the list. So, part of it is dealing with the panoply of things that were landed on my plate. I'm not complaining. It's just a reality. It's reality, number one. Number two, I think the part of what has to happen here as well, for example, let's talk about my economic plan. The economic plan, you all are always, and understandably, legitimately, citing polls. Every element of my economic plan is overwhelmingly popular. Overwhelmingly popular. But the problem is, with everything happening, not everybody knows what's in that plan. For example, all those women out there who are not able to go back to work because they have a dependent grandparent or a parent, or they have a dependent child who needs help, or they can't find daycare, or they can't find, Look at what's happening. Well, there's a solution. There's a solution in the proposal that I put forward, and the plans we're now debating in the United States among ourselves, and they're debating in Congress, is the plan, the essence of the plan that I laid out in the beginning. And so I'm confident that at the end of the day, we're going to be able to get that done. Second point I'd like to make, we talk about price tags. It is zero price tag on the debt. We're going to pay for everything we spend. So it's not, people, understandably, well, it started off at 6 trillion, now it's 3.5 trillion, now is it going to be 2.9? It's going to be zero, because in that plan that I put forward, and I said from the outset, I said, I'm running to change the dynamic of how the economy grows. I'm tired of trickle down. The trillionaires and billionaires are doing very, very well. You all know it, you've all reported it. And in the middle of this crisis, but hardworking people and middle-class people are getting hurt. And so I provide for example, a tax cut. If you have a child, you get a refundable tax credit. It's reduced hunger in America by 40%, literally for children. You have the whole notion of being able to provide for daycare for your children, getting people back to school, et cetera. It's all paid for. It's all paid for. But a lot of these are flat tax cuts that exist within my proposal. And they're being calculated as if the cost of the child care tax credit is a cost to the government. It's not. It's reducing taxes, not increasing taxes. Now, part of the problem is I hadn't planned on, although I kind of anticipated it might happen, I hadn't planned on the 178-mile top winds, hurricanes going to Louisiana and 20 inches of rain in New York and New Jersey and an area as big as the state of New Jersey burning down in the west. And so what I had hoped I would be doing, I'd do what I did in the campaign. I'd be out making the case about what my plan contained. And it's been very much curtailed by a whole range of things. And so I think that it's understandable. I think it's understandable, people being frustrated. I think they're frustrated as well by the fact that not just members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, frustrated by, I thought this was going to be better. I thought everything was working out. We were moving along on COVID-19. And now we have all these people who refuse to get a shot. And now look at the people dying, large numbers of people dying. So I think it's a totally obviously it's a legitimate question you've asked, but I think putting it in context here, it's going to take some time here. And I know I always kid you when you all ask me about, well, what about, are you going to get A done, B done, C done? Well, I say, you want to negotiate. I'm being a bit facetious, obviously, but here's the deal. This is going to end up, I believe, we're going to end up getting both the pieces of my economic legislation. The first piece, the 1.9, fundamentally changed the structure and the nature of the economy in this country. Even though, remember, it got clobbered. It was this terrible thing, no Republican voted for it. Well, we got real economic growth. Now we're at this stalemate at the moment, and we're going to have to get these two pieces of legislation passed. Both need to be passed, and they'll have a profound impact, according to not Joe Biden, but according to Wall Street, according to the IMF, according to international organizations. And then there's, I'm going to be having a meeting today with the Quad, with the leader of India, Japan, and Australia, and we're going to be talking about Afghanistan, which is a legitimate thing for people to talk about. But the truth of the matter is, the end of the day is we were spending $300 million a day for 20 years. There was no easy way to end that. And we're now still getting people out, but it's really, there's no picture book way to say, okay, the war's ended, let's get everybody out and we'll go home. No war's ever ended that way, other than there's been a surrender and it's a totally different circumstance. So anyway, there's a lot, I'm sure, along the line that there are things I could have done better, but I make no apologies for my proposals, how I'm proceeding, and why I think by the end of the year we're going to be in a very different place.
Just to follow up on COVID, if I can quickly, what do you say to Americans who disregard the new CDC guidance and get a booster shot anyway?
Well, I'm not sure how they get it, but
People who go into stores right now and just have got it without any high-risk situation or underneath that age limit. It happens around the country as we speak.
Well, I think what's going to happen is you're going to see that in the near term, we're probably going to open this up anyway. They're constantly looking at, we're looking at both Moderna and J&J, and we're both, as I said in the speech. In addition to that, we're also looking to the time when we're going to be able to expand the booster shots basically across the board. So I would just say it'd be better to wait your turn in line, wait your turn, and to get there. Ken.
Thank you, Mr. President. When you met with congressional leaders this week, you told them to try to find a number less than $3.5 trillion on the reconciliation package that they could live with. What is that top line number in your mind as you deliberate these considerations? And then separately, you mentioned how you're going to pay for some of these provisions. Senator Wyden has a proposal on annual taxes on billionaires' unrealized gains. Is that a proposal that you support?
Yes, I do. Look, I support a lot of these proposals. We don't need all the things I support to pay for this, but I do support that. Look, if you file with a W-2 form, the IRS has access to your bank account, and your bank tells you how much you made, what you have in there, and they estimate your tax. Well, if you have no income, if you have no earned income, and it's all investment income, it's hard to figure out what the heck you have. And that's why we have to, and I know some people don't like this, that's why we have to rehire some IRS agents, and not to do anything, not to try to make people pay something they don't know, just say, hey, step up and pay like everybody else does. Look, I really mean this, and you look at my whole career, and I come from the corporate state of America. I just think it's about just paying your fair share, for Lord's sake. Now, we can argue whether or not the corporate tax should go back up to 26.5% or 28 or 24, but the idea that 50 major corporations in America making a sum total of $40 billion pay zero? Come on, it's just wrong. It's just not fair. And I think it's beginning to sink through the ether a little bit here on the part of people. So I think there clearly is enough from a panoply of options to pay for whatever it is that folks decide to pay for. And let me finish by answering the initial part of your question, if I may. The way I look at it is what I've been telling my colleagues, and it surprises them sometimes when we're in those rooms, and I don't know whether you heard, but both meetings went very well. I mean, they were collegial. There wasn't, no one's hollering, everybody's, and people were hanging out afterwards in the Oval, and anyway, both the progressives as well as the moderates. And one of the things that I think is important and I'm trying to get people to focus on, is what is it you like? What do you think we should, don't forget a number. What do you think we should be doing? Is it appropriate, in your view, to cut taxes for working class people by providing for daycare, providing for early education, 3 and 4 years old? Is it appropriate to do something about free community college, or do you want to means test it? I'm telling you, what are your priorities? And several of them, when they go through their priorities, it adds up to a number higher than they said they were for. Because I think this is, we're getting down to the hard spot here. People are having now to go in and look in detail as to what it is specifically they're for. It's a little bit like when we went through, and I'll end with this, it's a little bit like when we went through the issue of the bipartisan deal on infrastructure. There were a lot of negotiations on that. And it wasn't until people were forced to look at, what are you for? Are you for taking care of that highway or bridge in your state or that region or your region? Are you for doing something about environmental degradation? Are you for something that deals with allowing us to provide for monies to states so that they can, in fact, deal with things like what happened in states where the major utility lines come down? What do you do to build those back better, to prevent that from happening? And it's sort of and you all speak to all these folks, so you speak to as many as I do. I find that they're going, I never really thought that through before. I think it makes sense. And that's how we finally got to a bipartisan deal on what is a serious infrastructure proposal that really does a number of things, including things when people said, I don't want to do anything in the environment. Then they start thinking, well, wait a minute, I have all these diesel buses at home. It would be a hell of a lot better if we had electric buses. It would change the circumstance on boom, boom, boom. So I think this is a process. That's why I said at the front end that although we got off to a very fast start with the first piece of legislation, I don't expect this to be done and us being in a position where we can look back and say, okay, did we get it done? Until basically the end of the year. I don't mean the vote on the two pieces of legislation relating to the economy, but I think it's just going to take some time. And look, my guess is we all come from similar backgrounds. Remember, you used to sit around the kitchen table in the morning, if you had the chance to do that, or a dinner at night with your mom and dad and your brothers and sisters. What did people talk about? They talked about, are we going to be able to pay the mortgage? At least my house. I mean, what's going to happen if we have another one of those floods and it, blows through here like it did in Queens? What's going to happen? What are we going to do? By the way, I'm just not sure that I want, my son or daughter to be going into school when so many people are not vaccinated. I mean, it's just, I'm not sure I want Kenny to be there doing this, but these are practical things people are talking about. And they're looking down the road and they're looking at cost of living issues as well. And so what's the cost of living issues? Well, it's because we're in a position where the ability to have the product, the elements of the production of a product that in fact need to go into the production of that product are hard to get a hold of because people are in trouble. They're not able to produce them. They're not able to get it, or they're being hoarded. It's like, what we have with, and we're making progress, but like what we're doing with regard to making sure we have the computer chips to be able to keep, as in the vernacular, to keep, build automobiles. I mean, I think everybody was kind of surprised when I think if I had said to you, I may be dead wrong, but if I had said to you in, say, April, that I was going to get all three major manufacturers of American automobiles saying they're going to go electric, I doubt whether you thought that could be done. Well, we're out here in the back lawn. They've all of a sudden figured it out. They've had a bit of an epiphany. And they've realized, whoa, wait a minute, man. China's investing billions of dollars. China is getting battery technology. We're going to blah, blah, and this is going to happen anyway. And again, I'll just conclude by saying this is a process, and it's going to be up and down. That's why I don't look at the polls. Not a joke. Because it's going to go up and it's going to go down, it's going to go up. And hopefully at the end of the day, I'll be able to deliver on what I said I would do. One, bringing the country together on a few and very important things like on infrastructure, getting us in a position where we can have some coherent policy relative to foreign policy where there's agreement, moving us in a position where we're able to actually generate the kind of change in the dynamic of how we grow the economy. Not eliminate the super wealthy, not at all, but allow the working class and the middle class to be able to build out and up. And that can be done. And like I said, every time I hear, and I drive my staff crazy, every time I hear this is going to cost A, B, C, or D, the truth is, based on the commitment that I made, it's going to cost nothing because we're going to raise the revenue to pay for the things we're talking about. And we're going to give, and right now, if you take a look at the reconciliation piece, $1 trillion of that is the tax cuts. Not raising anybody's taxes, it's tax cuts. People can be paying less taxes, but the people paying less taxes are going to be working class folks. It's going to put women back to work. It's going to put people in situations where they have, as I know you're tired of hearing me saying, but my dad's constant refrain, just give people a little breathing room. A little breathing room. Thank you, guys.
Mr. President, how come you've never been to the border? Mr. President.
Sir, the debt limit, sir.
Das Hineinwachsen in die internationale Gemeinschaft nach allem Unheil, das von meinem Land ausgegangen war, und schließlich die friedliche Wiedervereinigung. Dieser glückliche deutsche Weg war nur möglich mit der Unterstützung unserer Nachbarn und unserer Partner. Und zweitens, wir sind uns überzeugt und bleiben überzeugt, der Weg in eine friedlichere Zukunft, die Lösung der großen offenen Menschheitsfragen wird noch weit, weit mehr Zusammenarbeit in der internationalen Staatengemeinschaft erfordern. In der Präambel der deutschen Verfassung lautet der Anspruch kurz und präzise, als gleichberechtigtes Glied in einem vereinten Europa dem Frieden in der Welt zu dienen. Dieser Anspruch, diese Verpflichtung, meine Damen und Herren, gilt für jede deutsche Regierung. Und deshalb war es mir wichtig, heute als Bundespräsident nach New York zu kommen und der internationalen Gemeinschaft diese Botschaft Deutschlands zu überbringen. Unsere Partner können sich auf uns verlassen und unsere Wettbewerber müssen weiter mit uns rechnen. In meinen Augen beginnt außenpolitische Verantwortung, Herr Präsident, mit einem ehrlichen und unverstellten Blick auf die Welt. Darum, um diesen Blick, haben sich die Rednerinnen und Redner dieser Generalversammlung in den letzten Tagen in ungewohnter Offenheit bemüht. Und in der Tat, die Lage der Welt ist heute in jeder Hinsicht ernüchternd. Der Fall von Kabul ist eine Zäsur. Wir haben unser Ziel erreicht, diejenigen zu besiegen, die vor 20 Jahren furchtbaren Terror über diese Stadt gebracht haben. Aber wir haben es in 2 Jahrzehnten nicht vermocht, trotz größter Anstrengungen und Investitionen eine selbsttragende politische Ordnung in Afghanistan zu errichten. Auch mein Land trägt Mitverantwortung und wir bleiben in Verantwortung, gerade für die vielen Afghaninnen und Afghanen, die auf eine friedlichere, freie, demokratische Zukunft gehofft hatten. Doch ich frage uns, was folgt aus dem Scheitern?
Welche Lehren, welche Aufgaben trauen wir uns zu, wenn wir doch erfahren mussten, wir haben zu viel gewollt? Ich bin überzeugt, Resignation wäre die falsche Lehre, sondern in meinen Augen bedeutet dieser Moment der geopolitischen Ernüchterung dreierlei für die Außenpolitik. Wir müssen ehrlicher, wir müssen klüger, aber auch stärker werden. Erstens, wir müssen ehrlich sein im Blick auf unsere Möglichkeiten und auch auf die Grenzen dieser Möglichkeiten. Wir müssen realistischer sein in der Definition und Priorisierung unserer Ziele und Interessen. Oftmals, meine Damen und Herren, können wir mehr erreichen, wenn wir weniger wollen. Zweitens, wir müssen klüger sein in der Wahl unserer Instrumente und Schwerpunkte. Deutsche und europäische Außenpolitik darf sich nicht aufs Recht haben und Verurteilen beschränken, sondern wir müssen unseren Instrumentenkasten erweitern, diplomatisch, militärisch, zivil, humanitär. Und Klugheit heißt in meinen Augen auch, weniger Sendungsbewusstsein, sondern mehr Offenheit in der Suche nach Lösungswegen und auch Schnittmengen, auch mit denen, die anders sind als wir. Und drittens, auch wenn es manchem paradox erscheint, wir müssen stärker werden in unseren Möglichkeiten. Die Bürgerinnen und Bürger erwarten in allen unseren Staaten, dass ihre Regierungen sie vor Bedrohungen und Angriffen schützen. Und das zu Recht. Deshalb investiert auch mein Land in diesen instabilen Zeiten mehr in seine Verteidigungsfähigkeit. Aber klar ist auch, zukünftige Generationen werden uns nicht an militärischer Stärke heute messen, sondern daran, ob wir in der Lage waren, Probleme und Konflikte zu lösen. Militärische Stärke ohne den Willen zur Verständigung, ohne Mut zur Diplomatie, macht die Welt nicht friedlicher. Wir brauchen Verhandlungsstärke, ebenso wie Verteidigungsstärke. Auch deshalb hat Deutschland in den vergangenen beiden Jahren Verantwortung im Sicherheitsrat der Vereinten Nationen übernommen und wir möchten es in den Jahren 2027 und 2028 gerne erneut tun. Exzellenzen, verehrte Delegierte, ja, wir sind in Afghanistan mit vielem gescheitert. Aber unser Scheitern sollte für andere kein Grund zur Schadenfreude sein. Sehr bewusst nutze ich dieses deutsche Wort, das man in vielen Sprachen kennt, Schadenfreude. Ein Denken, in dem der Schaden des einen des anderen Gewinn ist, ein solches Denken wird der Wirklichkeit dieser vernetzten Welt nicht gerecht. Regionale Instabilität, erodierende Staatlichkeit, Flucht- und Migrationsströme, religiöser Extremismus und Terror und neue Konfliktformen, sowohl hybride wie digitale, Umwelt- und Ressourcenkonflikte. Solche Entwicklungen bedrohen uns alle und wir alle müssen damit umgehen, die Kleinen wie die Großen. Die Großmächte USA, China und Russland tragen dabei eine besondere Verantwortung, eine besondere Verantwortung auch für die kleineren Staaten. Denn die Vorrechte, die die großen Mächte im VN-System genießen, haben ihre Berechtigung nur, solange sie die internationale Friedensordnung im Interesse aller fördern und erhalten und nicht nach beliebigem Eigeninteresse entweder ignorieren oder unterlaufen. Die Vereinten Nationen sind kein wertneutraler Boxring der Weltmächte. Nun weiß ich auch, die Hand, die mit dem sprichwörtlich ausgestreckten Zeigefinger, die weist mit den anderen Fingern auf uns selbst zurück. Wer jetzt etwa vor einem amerikanischen Rückzug aus der Welt warnt, darf im eigenen Land
nicht ähnlichen Reflexen folgen. Wir Europäer, auch wir Deutsche, müssen mehr tun für unsere eigene Sicherheit, mehr tun für Frieden und Stabilität in unserer Nachbarschaft und das weltweit. Wir müssen unsere multilateralen Bemühungen fortsetzen. In Libyen, in der Ostukraine, im Mittleren Osten. Wir sind bereit, das Atomabkommen zu erneuern. Wir fordern, dass der Iran schnellstmöglich zu ernsthaften und ernst gemeinten Verhandlungen zurückkehrt. Meine Damen und Herren, ich weiß mich mit unserem engsten Partner Frankreich einig. Wir brauchen eine starke gemeinsame Außen- und Sicherheitspolitik in Europa. Nur ein starkes Europa kann von anderen verlangen, auch ihren Teil zur internationalen Friedensordnung beizutragen. Nur ein starkes Europa kann beides zugleich. Zusammenarbeit mit China suchen, wo Zusammenarbeit in beiderseitigem Interesse oder sogar notwendig ist, und zugleich von China Respekt einfordern für Menschenrechte und Völkerrechte und für die legitimen Interessen seiner Nachbarn. Eine starke, regelbasierte Friedensordnung braucht auch eine starke transatlantische Partnerschaft. Wir wissen, dass die USA neue und andere Schwerpunkte setzen. Und wir wissen, so wie die Welt sich ändert, müssen auch Bündnisse sich anpassen. Aber kein kurzfristiger Vorteil ist es wert, dass unsere transatlantische Geschlossenheit Risse bekommt. Darauf sollten wir miteinander achten. Die Verantwortung der großen Mächte, uns Europäer eingeschlossen, wiegt umso schwerer, wenn wir an die großen globalen Herausforderungen, an die großen Menschheitsfragen denken. Noch nie haben wir unsere gegenseitige Abhängigkeit. Noch nie haben wir unser Aufeinander angewiesen sein, so existenziell erfahren wie in den fast 2 Jahren der Covid-19-Pandemie. Und dennoch, obwohl wir doch wissen, dass diese Pandemie erst vorüber ist, wenn sie überall vorüber ist, unsere Bilanz in der globalen Impfstoffverteilung, die ist bestenfalls gemischt. Zu viele Menschen warten noch auf die rettende Impfung und deshalb darf die Verteilung kein Instrument für nationale Selbstdarstellung oder für taktische Gefälligkeiten sein, sondern die COVAX-Initiative unter dem Dach der Vereinten Nationen ist der richtige, weil der gemeinsame Weg. Jede dritte COVAX-Impfstoffdose wird von Europa bereitgestellt und mein Land wird als weltweit zweitgrößter Geber mit etwa 2,5 Milliarden Euro bis Jahresende noch zusätzlich mindestens 100 Millionen weitere Impfdosen beisteuern. Meine Damen und Herren, was für die existenzielle Bedrohung der Pandemie gilt, gilt nicht minder für den Klimawandel. Apokalyptische Brände, sengende Temperaturen, Wirbelstürme und Orkane, Missernten, Dürren und Hungersnöte, sie geschehen jetzt und sie geschehen hier. Sie bedrohen Menschen, Familien, Existenzen überall und besonders unter den Verwundbarsten, aber auch in den reichen Industrieländern. Schwerste Überflutungen im Westen Deutschlands haben in diesem Sommer fast 200 meiner Landsleute das Leben gekostet. Und auch aus dieser Stadt, New York City, stehen uns die jüngsten Bilder noch vor Augen, einbrechende Wassermassen in Straßen, Wohnungen und U-Bahn-Schächte. Vor diesem dramatischen Hintergrund ist der Rückfall in nationale Egoismen, vor dem ich warne, mehr als nur ein Schritt zurück in die Vergangenheit. Er ist Raubbau an unserer gemeinsamen Zukunft. Er beschädigt genau die Institutionen, Instrumente, die wir jetzt brauchen. Wir brauchen jetzt starke gemeinsame Entschlüsse demnächst in Glasgow. Denn auch beim Klimawandel trifft doch zu, die Lücke zwischen unseren anspruchsvollen Zielen und unserer konkreten Politik, die ist noch viel zu groß. Und wir sind es miteinander, die diese Lücke schließen müssen. Und wir müssen es jetzt tun. Denn wir leben in einem Zeitalter, in dem der Mensch die Lebensbedingungen auf dem Planeten irreversibel zerstören kann. Es ist an uns, an unserer Generation, die Zukunft für unsere Kinder und Enkel offen zu halten. Wir müssen eine Zukunft offen halten, in der Klimaschutz und wirtschaftlicher Wohlstand, in der ein selbstbestimmtes Leben in Freiheit und gesellschaftlicher Zusammenhalt noch zugleich möglich sind. Das ist, und ich benutze dieses große Wort nicht leichtfertig, das ist unsere große historische Aufgabe. Wir dürfen nicht scheitern, der Zukunft der Menschheit wegen. Verehrte delegierte Kolleginnen und Kollegen, ich habe meine Rede mit der Demokratie begonnen, dem bevorstehenden demokratischen Übergang in meinem eigenen Land. Am Ende möchte ich den Blick noch einmal weiten auf die Lage der liberalen Demokratie insgesamt, ihre Glaubwürdigkeit, ihre Wirkmacht, ihre Zukunft in diesem schwierigen weltpolitischen Moment. In Afghanistan ist ein langes, opferreiches Engagement gescheitert, aber nicht eine Idee. Mein Land fühlt sich der Idee von Freiheit und Demokratie im Innersten verpflichtet, vielleicht gerade, weil unser deutscher Weg dorthin ein weiter war. Natürlich wissen wir, in der Realität sind politische Systeme niemals perfekt. Nicht in Europa, nicht in Amerika, nirgendwo. Folglich können sie weder exportiert, geschweige denn oktroyiert werden. Ich glaube, die Aufgabe ist eine andere. Nicht durch missionarischen Eifer, sondern indem wir die Kraft der Demokratie bei uns selbst zum Leuchten bringen, indem wir die Demokratie im Alltag der Bürgerinnen und Bürger fruchtbar machen und jeder autoritären Versuchung trotzen, nur dadurch erweisen wir dieser großartigen Idee den besten Dienst. Präsident Biden hat hier vor der Generalversammlung von der weltumspannenden Kraft der Demokratie gesprochen. Ich möchte betonen, die Demokratie ist keine Kraft, die gegen irgendjemanden gerichtet ist. Sie ist kein Machtinstrument des Westens, sie ist ein offenes Projekt. Ohne Himmelsrichtung, ohne geografischen Grenzen oder Hautfarbe. Sie ist das Projekt der Freiheit, das Projekt der Menschenwürde, das sich die Staaten der Welt in der allgemeinen Erklärung der Menschenrechte zum Maßstab gesetzt haben. Und weil das unser Maßstab bleiben muss, ist für uns Deutsche auch nach dem Scheitern in Afghanistan ist Rückzug von der Welt keine Option. Solange Menschen ihrer Würde beraubt werden, ist Gleichgültigkeit keine Option. Deshalb bedeutet mehr Realismus in der Außenpolitik eben nicht weniger Verantwortung, bedeutet auch nicht weniger Ehrgeiz, die Welt zu einem besseren Ort zu machen. Ganz im Gegenteil. Das tiefe menschliche Verlangen nach Freiheit und Würde und Selbstbestimmung wird niemals und nirgendwo erlöschen. Diesem menschlichen Verlangen gerecht zu werden, statt es zu unterdrücken, das ist die wahre Schicksalsfrage des 21. Jahrhunderts. Und diese Frage wird auf keinem Schlachtfeld der Welt entschieden, denn die Feuerkraft der mächtigsten Armee der Welt ist endlich. Der lange Arm des stärksten Staates ist endlich. Aber die Strahlkraft von Freiheit und Demokratie in den Köpfen und Herzen der Menschen, sie ist es nicht. Und das ist meine Zuversicht. Herzlichen Dank.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Federal Republic of Germany for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Borut Pahor, President of the Republic of Slovenia. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Borut Pahor, President of the Republic of Slovenia, and I invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, almost all the challenges we face are global. The solutions for them can be found only in working together. We have a historic opportunity to steer change in a direction beneficial for all humanity. I welcome the Secretary General's intention to hold a wide debate about our common future. We have to engage in meaningful discussion and dialogue, even with those, and specifically with those we do not agree with. The culture of dialogue has dangerously deteriorated with the widespread intolerant, offensive, and even hate speech. We must do everything within our power to emphasize respect for and consideration of different opinions and their reconciliation. It is about art of listening and speaking to others. Constructive cooperation is possible only through a dialogue, and cooperation is the only way of reaching peaceful solution to all disputes. That being said, I would like, in my speech, to address three main topics: COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, and peace and security. First, about COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic is proving to be a demanding and also, unfortunately, divisive challenge for our societies. I express my deepest sympathies to all those who have suffered, and I pay respect to new heroes, among them medical and care workers, scientists, teachers, and the young generation who struggled with limited access to education. Science has once again proved its decisive role. The pandemic has set us to the greatest test in global solidarity in generations. I am proud to say that my country, Slovenia, pledged €500,000 to COVAX, and our share of donated vaccines measured per capita is among the highest. Second, about the climate change. Friends and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the recent report of International Panel on Climate Change is alarming. It has become clear that environment is in a worse condition than expected. Let me assure you that in its capacity as the presidency of the European Union Council, in the run-up and during COP26, Slovenia is committed to the objective of climate natural European Union by 2050. We will do its utmost to contribute to the success of the COP26 conference in Glasgow. It is imperative we move on climate change mitigation, adaptation, and financing in order to meet the objectives objectives of the Paris Agreement. The IPCC report is, in fact, a final urgent call for our immediate climate action. More than ever, we need to listen to scientists and experts. We can learn from them, and our decisions will be better. My permanent advisory committee on climate change, established 2 years ago, is an example of good practices. We regularly discuss a variety of aspects of climate changes and recommend it to the government or the House measures to be adopted. The much-needed green transition should go hand in hand with digital transformation. We must commit to achieving climate neutrality through reforms and investments in the areas of energy efficiency, renewable energy, sustainable mobility, and circular business models. The effects of climate change greatly impact water, both through droughts and the floods we have witnessed this summer and by affecting its quality. Competition for scarce water resources will intensify. The imminent water crisis is a threat, but also as an opportunity to rethink water innovations, governance, and collaboration on all levels. Slovenia is a country with a long tradition of integrated water resources management and cross-border cooperation on water. We will continue to raise awareness and understanding to the interlinkages between water and climate change and the importance of water for international peace and security. Mr. President, climate changes profoundly affect food security. For the very first time in modern history, a famine in one country, Madagascar, is attributed solely to global warming. Since 2014, Slovenia has doubled its contribution for food security. In particular, through the World Food Programme for South Sudan and for Yemen, but also in other bilateral projects. Slovenia is recently helping to ensure food and water security for children and other vulnerable groups in Madagascar through Akamasoa, founded by Father Pedro Peca, an outstanding example of fighting poverty, who over the last 30 years has changed the lives of thousands and thousands of poor people who once lived on rubbish dumps. The Akamasoa community in Madagascar gives humanity high hopes that poverty can be eradicated. However, our efforts to fight famine need to go beyond humanitarian aid. We have to accelerate the transition to sustainable and resilient food system. That is why Slovenia welcomes the holding of the very first UN Summit on Food Systems. I see it as an opportunity to raise awareness of the importance of responsible investments in environmentally friendly agriculture and the prevention of food losses and waste. I believe the responsible use of new and emerging technologies can help us deal with modern technologies and challenges. New technologies offer numerous opportunities to mitigate climate change, support sustainable agriculture, introduce smarter mobility, offer better education, and improve the effective use of resources, to name just a few. That is why I was delighted to, together with the UNESCO Director General, Madame Ozolai, officially launch the International Research Center of Artificial Intelligence back in March in Ljubljana, the capital of Slovenia. The pandemic has only increased our dependence on the digital space, while at the same time revealed its vulnerabilities to the spread of already mentioned hate speech. It is important to keep in mind that fundamental freedoms apply both online and offline. And finally, about peace and security. The dependence on digital space has revealed it also our vulnerability to security threats and to cyber attacks. It has highlighted the extent of the damage caused by such attacks with regard to critical infrastructure, the economy, society, or even loss of lives. The nature of conflicts has expanded. To enable peace and security in all domains, we should collectively and more efficiently respond to different crises which exceeded the capacities of individual states to react. We should also more energetically promote reconciliation processes once peace and security are established. The interconnected and interdependent nature of peace and security, sustainable development, and human rights is more evident than ever. COVID-19 pandemic has worsened the situation of most vulnerable members of our societies, children, elderly, human rights defenders. In many societies, we face shrinking space for freedom of expression. The full realization of human rights for all have proven to be key to our resilience and must be an integral part of our recovery. The situation in Afghanistan has exposed the fragility of our human rights system. Let us never forget that women and children's rights, as well as rights of different minorities, are universal human rights. Slovenia thus welcomed the Secretary General call for action on human rights and supports allocation a higher regular budget for the work of the UN Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights. And finally, Mr. President, following the atrocities of the Second World War, we have built an international system for the promotion of a dialogue and a peaceful settlement of all disputes. The system is codified by international law, and we must actively ensure respect for the principles of international law and the strengthening of international justice. This is about effective multilateralism, which Slovenia is passionately advocating for. This is the United Nations' finest achievement. Once again, let us work together. Thank you for your attention.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Slovenia for the statement just made, and I request the protocol to escort His Excellency. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Paraguay to introduce an address by the head of state.
Gracias, señor presidente del 76º periodo de sesiones de la Asamblea General. Tengo el alto honor de presentar el mensaje pregrabado del excelentísimo señor presidente de la República del Paraguay, don Mario Abdo Benítez.
Señor presidente de la Asamblea General, señor secretario general de las Naciones Unidas, señoras y señores, nos encontramos reunidos afrontando los problemas que más angustia a cada uno de nuestros pueblos, con la responsabilidad de que cada discurso sea más que palabras y que podamos generar un espacio para una reflexión profunda y sincera. El COVID-19
COVID-19 continues to teach us all a lesson. It has shown us how solidarity and empathy are vital to tackle a pandemic such as this. We have seen how countries made laudably swift progress in vaccine manufacture. But the pandemic also brought to light some realities that we need to face up to. Vaccines. It has been so difficult for many countries such as ours to have to tell our peoples that despite having made arrangements and having paid for vaccines on time through the COVAX mechanism recommended by the World Health Organization to guarantee equitable distribution, vaccines didn't arrive on time. Paraguay and many other countries were made to wait in this way. Paraguay has always stood for multilateralism because we understand that common problems, the common problems that transcend our countries need a joint response, as is the case of COVID-19. However, we cannot conceal our deep-felt disappointment at the response of the multilateral system to ensure an effective and timely vaccine distribution. This reality must be addressed in this forum with a determination to assess what happened and to drive changes for the future. We cannot look the other way and overlook the fact that some attempted to use the vaccine as a tool, both political and ideological, at one of the most trying times in the recent history of humankind. I wish to underscore the cooperation of kindred and friendly countries which selflessly extended a hand of solidarity to the Paraguayan people through the donation of vaccines, which allowed us to save lives and to forge ahead with our immunization program. Once again, I wish to express my gratitude to the governments of the United States, Qatar, India, Spain, Mexico, Chile, Colombia, the United Arab Emirates, and Uruguay for such a noble gesture. Our country will never forget it. Mr. President, the Paraguayan economy is to a large extent underpinned by the production of food for the rest of the world, and our situation as a landlocked developing country markedly and structurally influences our development. In the context of the post-pandemic recovery, this situation will once again be decisive, and it will be vital to facilitate the effective access for our products to markets in the most developed countries. For our part, to lessen the impact of this situation, we are making strides to transform our geographic location into an advantage. The ambitious Bioceanic Corridor project that we are working to advance will cross Paraguayan territory and will join the Atlantic Ocean with the Pacific. It stands as a clear example of how we plan to harness our geographic location and promote the physical integration of our region. Integration and sustainable development are major priorities of the foreign policy of the Republic of Paraguay. Decades ago, my country advocated an energy matrix based on clean and renewable energy,
del cuidado del
committing
medio
to care for the
ambiente con la
environment
convicción
and
de que la
convinced
energía
that
es un
energy
requisito
is a
indispensable
crucial
para seguir
requirement to
proyectando el
continue to
desarrollo.
forge ahead with development.
Señoras y señores, el
Ladies
cambio
and
climático
gentlemen,
está vinculado
climate
a la
change
actual crisis
is linked
hídrica que
to
afecta a
the
nuestra
current
región.
water
Los
crisis
niveles
affecting our
bajos
region.
que se registran en los ríos
The low water levels
comprometen la
recorded in
disponibilidad del
rivers are
agua para el
compromising the
consumo humano,
availability of water for
afectan
human
las
consumption
condiciones de
and
navegabilidad
affecting
y
navigability
perjudican
conditions.
gravemente nuestro comercio
The situation
exterior,
is
que
further
depende
seriously
del transporte
harming our
fluvial
foreign
y amenaza
trade, which
la
depends on
eficiencia de
waterway
nuestras fuentes de
transport
generación de
and
energía.
threatens the
Por
efficiency
eso,
of our
subrayamos
sources of
la
energy
importancia
generation.
de honrar
Therefore,
los
we underscore
compromisos
the importance
internacionales del
of
Acuerdo de
honouring
París,
the international
en
commitments
particular
made within the
los que
Paris
se
Agreement,
refieren
and
al financiamiento
particularly
climático
those referring
para
to climate
apoyar
financing,
los esfuerzos
and
de
that to
mitigación y
support the
adaptación
mitigation and
de los países
adaptation
en
efforts
desarrollo,
of
en
developing
especial
countries,
los que somos más
particularly
vulnerables
those of us
al
who are
calentamiento
most
global.
vulnerable
Señor
to
presidente,
global warming.
el terrorismo,
Mr.
el
President,
narcotráfico y el
terrorism,
crimen
drug
organizado
trafficking and transnational
son
organized
amenazas
crime are
reales
real
para la
threats for
comunidad
the international
internacional.
community.
Por ello, el Paraguay
Thus,
está comprometido con
Paraguay
el combate
is
frontal a
committed
su
to
financiamiento
directly
y en
financing
particular
their
al lavado de
funding
activos,
and in
para lo
particular
cual
money
ha
laundering.
adoptado medidas
To that end, we have
Excellencies, while we wait for the video of the head of state of the State of Palestine being made ready, we may need to move to the next speaker. So allow us a few more time.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سعادة السيد
In the name of God, the most merciful and compassionate, Your Excellency, Mr. Abdullah Shahid, President of the United Nations General Assembly, Your Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations,
I would now like to give the floor again to the observer of the Observer State of Palestine to introduce an address by the head of state. You have the floor, sir.
السيد الرئيس
Madam President,
أتشرف بأن أقدم لكم الكلمة المسجلة لسيادة الرئيس محمود عباس رئيس دولة فلسطين أمام الدورة السادسة والسبعين للجمعية العامة متمنيا لدورتكم النجاح في مواجهة التحديات التي تواجه شعوب العالم وشعبنا الذين يتطلعون إلينا للقيام بواجباتنا لإحقاق حقوقهم.
and fulfill their rights. Thank you. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, Your Excellency, Mr. Abdullah Shahid, President of the United Nations General Assembly, Your Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Excellencies, heads of delegations, members of delegations, ladies and gentlemen, may the peace, blessings and mercy of God be upon you. This year marks the 73rd anniversary of the Nakba. More than half of the Palestinian people were uprooted from their land and disposed of their property. Myself, my family and many others still possess the deeds to our land. These deeds are registered as part of the United Nations records. Here is that deed, and many Palestinians carry theirs as they still hold on to the keys of their houses to this day. Nevertheless, we have not been able to recover our property due to Israeli laws that disregard international law and violate United Nations resolutions which affirm the right of the Palestinian refugees to return to their homeland and to recover their property and to receive just compensation, most notably as enshrined in Resolution 194. In contrast, Israel, the occupying power, enacts laws and holds court hearings to unlawfully and forcibly displace Palestinians from Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan neighborhoods in Jerusalem, which can only be characterized under international law as ethnic cleansing, which is rejected by our people and the international community as a whole and constitutes a crime under international law. This year also marks 54 years since Israel's military occupation of the rest of the Palestinian territory in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip in 1967. This occupation persists, despite having concluded a declaration of principles known as the Oslo Accord to achieve peace and mutual recognition with Israel in 1993, while we remained committed to all of its elements to this day and agreed to every call and initiative to achieve a political solution on the basis of international legitimacy, including the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative and the 2003 Quartet Roadmap, Israel has not honored its obligations under the signed agreements and has evaded participating in peace initiatives and instead pursued its expansionist colonial enterprise, destroying the prospect of a political settlement based on the two-state solution. To those who claim that there is no Palestinian partner for peace, to those claiming that we're missing opportunities just for the sake of it, I challenge them to demonstrate that we have rejected even once a genuine and serious initiative to achieve peace. And I accept the judgment of the world in this regard. Ladies and gentlemen, does the Israeli occupying power believe that it can elude its responsibility for the crime of uprooting more than half of the Palestinian people from their land and for committing numerous massacres, killing and maiming thousands of Palestinians in 1948 in Balad el-Sheikh, Deir Yassin, Abu Shusha, Tantura, Ain Zaytun, والتي تلاها تدمير ومسح آثار أكثر من 500 قرية وبلدة وتجمع فلسطيني. Over 500 Palestinian towns and villages, does Israel believe it can simply ignore the legitimate rights, including the political rights of millions of Palestinians within and outside of Palestine, the owners and sons of daughters of this land, with Jerusalem at its heart? Does it believe it can continue its policies to steal their land, suffocate their economy, and prevent them from even breathing the air of freedom? Does Israel believe
رواية
It can endlessly
تسويق
promote
رواية
a
زائفة
false narrative
تتجاهل
that
حق
ignores
الشعب
the
الفلسطيني
historical
التاريخي
and present
والحاضر في
rights
وطنه
of the
ما
Palestinian people to their
تقوم به
homeland,
سلطة الاحتلال الإسرائيلي من
the
جرائم
crimes and aggressive
وممارسات
policies of the
عدوانية
Israeli
ضد
occupying
أبناء
power
شعبنا
against our people,
وأرضنا
land, and holy
ومقدساتنا
sites
لن
will not
توقف نضال
derail
شعبنا
our
من
people's
أجل
struggle
تحقيق
to
حريته
achieve their freedom and
واستقلاله
independence
على أرضه
on their
كما
land.
وأن النظام الاستعماري الذي
The
أنشأته على
colonial
أرضنا
regime that Israel has
مآله
established
إلى
on our
زوال
land will
طال
disappear,
الزمن
regardless
أم
of how long it takes.
لن نسمح لهم
We will not
بالاستيلاء
allow
على
them to
حياتنا
hijack our
وقتل
lives
أحلام
and kill our
وآمال
people's
وطموحات
dreams,
شعبنا
hopes,
في
and
الحرية
aspirations to
والاستقلال.
realize freedom and
أيها
independence.
السيدات والسادة
Ladies and gentlemen,
إنما يؤسف
it is
له
regrettable
أن سياسات المجتمع
that the
الدولي
policies of the
وهيئات
international
الأمم المتحدة
community
تجاه حل القضية الفلسطينية قد
and the
فشلت
resolutions
جميعها
of the relevant
حتى
United
الآن
Nations bodies
لأنها لم
regarding a
تتمكن
solution for the question
من
of
محاسبة
Palestine have
إسرائيل
until now
ومفاعلتها
not been
وفرض
upheld and
عقوبات
implemented,
عليها بسبب
resulting in a
انتهاكاتها
failure to hold Israel
للقانون
accountable
الدولي ما جعل إسرائيل التي
and
تدعي
impose
بأنها
sanctions
دولة
for its violations
ديمقراطية
of
تتصرف
international law,
كدولة فوق القانون
allowing Israel, which claims to be a
أيها
democratic
السيدات
state, to
والسادة
act as a state
لا
above the law.
زالت
Ladies and
هناك
gentlemen,
بعض
there are
الدول
still some
التي
countries
لم
that
تقم
refuse to
بالإقرار
acknowledge the
بحقيقة
reality
أن
that Israel is an
هي سلطة
occupying
احتلال
power,
وتمييز
participating,
عنصري وتطهير
rather
عرقي
practicing
وبعض
apartheid
هذه
and
الدول
ethnic cleansing.
تتفاخر
These
بأنها
countries proudly
تتشارك مع
state that they
إسرائيل
have shared values
بذات
with
القيم
Israel.
فعن أي
What
قيم
shared values are they
مشتركة
referring to?
يتحدثون فعن أي
What shared
قيم
values are they
مشتركة
referring to?
يتحدثون إن هذا الأمر
This
أوصل
has
إسرائيل
made
إلى
Israel
حد الغرور
arrogant,
والغطرسة
emboldening
ورفض
it
جميع
to
القرارات
reject and
الأممية
violate
وضربها
all
عرض
United
الحائط.
Nations resolutions.
في مقابل
At the
ذلك
same time,
فإن هناك من يطالب
there are
الشعب
those who
الفلسطيني
demand from the Palestinian
ومؤسساته
people and institutions
التي تؤمن
that
بثقافة
believe in the
السلام
culture of peace
وسيادة
and the rule of
القانون
law
أن يقدم
to
التفسيرات
provide
والشروحات
explanations and
ويثبت أنه لا
justifications
يقوم
to
بالتحريض على
demonstrate that they
الكراهية
do not
أو
incite hatred
تشجيع العنف.
or promote
وعلى
violence.
سبيل
For
المثال
example,
علينا
we
أن
have to
نشرح
explain and
ونبرر
justify
ما يكتب في
what
مناهجنا
appears in our
المدرسية
curricula,
رغم أنها
which reflects
تشرح
our
روايتنا
narrative and
وهويتنا
national
الوطنية
identity.
بينما
While no
لا
one
يطالب أحد
is demanding to
إطلاقا
review the
بالاطلاع
Israeli
على
curricula
المناهج
and media.
والإعلام الإسرائيلي ليرى العالم التحريض
that the
الحقيقي
world could
الذي
see the
تقوم
real
به
incitement by
المؤسسات
Israeli
المختلفة
institutions.
في إسرائيل. إننا
We
نرفض
reject
مثل
these
هذه
double
المعايير
standards.
المزدوجة المعايير
We
المزدوجة
reject these double standards.
ولماذا علينا أن نوضح
Why should we have to
ونبرر
clarify and
توفير
justify
الرعاية
providing
لعائلات
assistance
الأسرى
to families of
والجرحى
prisoners and martyrs
والشهداء الذين هم ضحايا
who are the victims of the
الاحتلال
occupation
وممارساته
and its
القمعية.
oppressive policies?
لا يمكن أيها
We
السيدات
cannot, ladies and
والسادة
gentlemen,
أن
abandon
نتخلى
our
عن
people,
أبناء شعبنا وسنواصل
and
العمل
we will
حتى
continue
إطلاق
our
سراح
efforts until
أسرانا
our
جميعا.
prisoners are
وتحية
freed.
هنا
And I
لهبة
salute
الأسرى
here the
تحية
prisoners'
لهبة
heroic
الأسرى.
stand.
فإذا اندحر
If the
الاحتلال
occupation
لن
ends,
يكون
there will no longer
هناك
be a
قضية
prisoner's issue.
أسرى. كما وإنني أتساءل
I cannot
وأخاطب
but wonder,
الضمائر
and I
الحية
address
في
all
العالم
people of
هل
conscience
هناك
around the world.
في هذا
Is there
الكون
anyone
من
on this
يعاقب
earth who
الجثامين
would punish the
ويمنع
dead
الأهل
and
من
prevent their
دفنها
families from
إلا
burying
من
them,
افتقد
except those
الأخلاق
who are deprived of
والإنسانية
morality
فقط؟
and humanity?
فإلى متى
Until when
سيستمر
will
هذا
this
الظلم
historical
التاريخي
injustice against our
لشعبنا؟
people continue?
وهل
Do
تعتقد
the states
الدول
that
التي
provide
تدعم
financial
إسرائيل
and military
بتقديم
support to
المزيد من
Israel,
المال
which
والسلاح
then uses
الذي
to prolong
تستخدمه
its
لإطالة
occupation
أمد احتلالها
and
وقتل
kill
الفلسطينيين
Palestinians?
والسكوت على سياساتها العدوانية
Do those that
وحصار
remain silent in the
الفلسطينيين
face of
وخنق
Israel's aggressive
أنفاسهم؟
policies,
هل تعتقد
it
أنها
besieging and
بذلك
suffocating
ستأتي
Palestinians? Do these states
بالأمن
actually
والسلام
believe
للشعب
they're
الإسرائيلي
ensuring peace and
وبالاستقرار
security
في
for the Israeli
المنطقة؟
people and
الجواب
stability for the the region? The answer is no. I say it loud and clear, and emphatic, incontrovertible no. What more do you want from the Palestinian people? We have honored all our obligations under United Nations resolutions. We forced ourselves to endure the suffering imposed upon us
فماذا
waiting for
كانت
hope. And what was the
النتيجة؟
result?
لقد أثبتت
Historical events
أحداث
over the
التاريخ
decades
طوال
have
العقود
proven
الماضية
that
عدم
these
صوابية هذه
international policies
السياسات
towards
الدولية
Israel
تجاه
are
إسرائيل.
misguided.
السيدات والسادة،
Ladies and
في
gentlemen,
إطار تمتين جبهتنا الداخلية نؤكد مجددا
unifying our
منظمة
internal
التحرير
front, we
الفلسطينية
reiterate once
هي
again
الممثل
that the Palestinian
الشرعي
Liberation
والوحيد
Organization
لشعبنا
is the legitimate
الفلسطيني،
and sole
وأننا
representative of the
نحرص على
Palestinian
وحدة
people.
شعبنا وأرضنا
We
والذهاب
stress
إلى
that we are committed
انتخابات
to the unity
عامة
of our people and our
ورئاسية
land,
ومجلس وطني
committed to
بمجرد
holding
ضمان
legislative,
تنظيمها
presidential,
في
and national
القدس
council
حسب
elections.
الاتفاقيات الموقعة،
As soon as holding such
وندعو
elections
المجتمع
in
الدولي
Jerusalem is guaranteed as per
لمساعدتنا
signed
في
agreements,
الضغط
we
على
call on
حكومة
the international
الاحتلال
community to help us bring
لتنظيم
pressure to
هذه
bear upon the
الانتخابات
occupying
في
power
القدس
to ensure these
حيث لا
elections are
يعقل
held in
أن نبقى
Jerusalem,
بدون
as
انتخابات.
it is
وأقول هنا
inconceivable that we remain
نحن لم
unable
نلغي
to hold elections.
الانتخابات
And let me state
وإنما
here once
أجلناها
again, we did
بسبب
not cancel the
عدم
elections,
وجود
but we only
القدس
postponed
كمكان
them as we
للانتخابات.
could not hold them
وإلى
in
حين
Jerusalem.
تحقيق
Until this
ذلك
situation is
فإننا
addressed, we will
سنواصل
continue to
السعي
work on
من أجل
creating
توفير
the
الشروط
necessary
اللازمة
conditions
لتشكيل
to form a
حكومة وحدة
successful
وطنية ناجحة
national unity government,
حتى نتمكن من
so
مساعدة
that we can
أبناء
assist
شعبنا
our
في
people
كل
everywhere,
مكان
so that we
وتنفيذ
can
عملية
implement
إعادة
reconstruction
الإعمار في
plans
قطاع
in the Gaza
غزة،
Strip,
الأمر الذي
which requires
يتطلب
a
وقفا
complete
كاملا
end to
وشاملا
the
للعدوان
aggression throughout
في كل
the
مكان
territory
على أرض دولة
of the
فلسطين.
state of Palestine.
ويسعدنا أن نؤكد أن الأشهر
I'm glad
القادمة
to reaffirm
ستشهد
that the
تنظيم
coming months
الانتخابات
will witness the
البلدية
holding of
في
municipal
الأراضي
elections
الفلسطينية وفق القانون،
in accordance with the law,
وستتواصل
and
الانتخابات
elections for all
بجميع
unions and
الاتحادات والنقابات
universities
والجامعات
are already
التي شرعنا
underway.
فعلا فيها منذ حين.
Ladies and gentlemen,
السيدات والسادة، على صعيد بناء
regarding building
مؤسسات
state
الدولة
institutions,
نؤكد
we
أن
stress
لدينا دولة
that
كاملة
we
البنيان
have a fully fledged
مؤسساتها
state
تعمل وفق
with
سيادة
institutions
القانون
that operate in accordance with the rule of law
والشفافية
and the principles of
والديمقراطية
accountability, transparency,
والتعددية
democracy,
واحترام حقوق
pluralism,
الإنسان
respect for
وتمكين
human rights,
المرأة
and the empowerment
والشباب.
of women and
وقد
youth.
نجحنا في
We
الانضمام
have
لأكثر من
acceded
115
to more than
منظمة
115
ومعاهدة
legal
دولية
instruments and
بهدف
international
الدفاع عن
organizations
حقوق شعبنا
committed to upholding our people's
وتعزيز
rights and
القوانين
strengthening
والنظم
our
الفلسطينية
legislation and
بما
regulations,
فيها
including
حقوق
those pertaining to
الإنسان.
human rights.
وسنستمر في العمل على الانضمام مع
We will
المنظمات
continue our
الدولية
efforts
ما تبقى منها من
to accede to
المعروفة
what remains
في
of
الأمم
the
المتحدة.
500 international organizations acknowledged by the United Nations. We have taken the initiative of working jointly with human rights organizations and civil society organizations in Palestine to preserve these national accomplishments and to improve the work of our institutions on the basis of the rule of law. I have issued instructions to take all necessary measures to correct any wrongdoing and to continue upholding the rule of law, the freedom of expression and human rights. And this is the path that we are committed to in my country. I reaffirm to the international community our commitment to political engagement and dialogue as the path to achieve peace, the path for peaceful popular resistance, the path to combat terrorism in all its forms and origins in our region and the world.
أكثر من 83
اتفاقية
مع دول العالم
83 agreements with other countries around the world to combat global terrorism. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish to refer here to the constructive dialogue currently underway with the United States administration to resume Palestinian-US relations and to take steps that would ensure that the occupying power would abide by signed agreements. From our side, we are committed to ensuring the success of this dialogue to create conditions conducive to moving swiftly towards a final political settlement that ends the Israeli occupation of our country.
and
that applies the two-state solution. However, the current and former Israeli governments have persisted in evading the two-state solution based on international law and UN resolutions, and insisted on pursuing occupation and military control over the Palestinian people, while presenting flimsy, insubstantial economic and security plans as an alternative. These unilateral plans will not achieve security and stability for anyone, as they undermine efforts for genuine peace and prolong occupation and entrench the reality of one apartheid state. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a moment of truth with the occupying power. It seems we are at a crossroads. We have had enough. The situation cannot continue, and our people cannot endure it any longer. I have dedicated my life to achieving peace and chose the path of peaceful, legal, and diplomatic work in international fora. We have extended our hand time and again for peace, and still we cannot find a partner in Israel that believes in and accepts the two-state solution. The leaders of Israel today no longer feel any shame when they arrogantly dismiss this solution that enjoys global consensus. I warn that undermining the two-state solution based on international law and UN resolutions will open the way for other alternatives imposed upon us by the situation on the ground. As a result of the continuation of the Israeli occupation of our state, the absence of a just solution for the plight of 7 million Palestinian refugees uprooted from their land in 1948, the systematic theft of Palestinian land and the ongoing crimes of the occupation and the demolition of homes as a means of collective punishment, the killings and the detentions of thousands, including women, sick people, and children. The imposition of an inhumane blockade, an unjust blockade on the Gaza Strip, and the annexation measures under numerous pretexts and names, including the settlement plan that they now invented in the city of Jerusalem and that we fully reject. All of this, coupled with the crime of forcibly displacing Palestinians from their land as part of a policy of racial discrimination and ethnic cleansing pursued by the occupation in the absence of a deterrent international response. Our people will not surrender to the reality of occupation and its illegal policies and practices. We will pursue our just struggle to fulfill our right to self-determination. And options are available, including returning to a solution based on the partition plan of Resolution 181 of 1947, which gives the State of Palestine 44% of the land, double the territories that we ended up with after 1967. We remind everyone that Israel seized by military force half of the land specified for the State of Palestine in 1948. The solution would be indeed in conformity with international legitimacy. If the Israeli occupation authorities continue to entrench the reality of one apartheid state, as is happening today, our Palestinian people and the entire world will not tolerate such a situation, and circumstances on the ground will inevitably impose equal and full political rights for all on the land of historical Palestine within one state. In all cases, Israel has to choose. These are the options, and Israel has to choose. Ladies and gentlemen, International law stipulates the right to a free and dignified life and calls on states to take the necessary measures to protect and secure this right, as protection constitutes an indispensable and decisive element for the maintenance of peace, security, stability, and development. In this regard, I call on the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, to work on the basis of relevant United Nations resolutions on protection, including the resolution adopted during the General Assembly Emergency Special Summit held in June 2018, entitled Uniting for Peace. I call upon the Secretary General to take all the necessary steps towards developing an international mechanism for protection as foreseen in his report of August 2018. And I call upon him to activate this mechanism on the borders of the occupied state of Palestine, including East Jerusalem, to avail our people of international protection. The borders of 1967. In parallel and in accordance with the aforementioned resolution, I call upon the Secretary General to convene an international peace conference in line with the internationally recognized terms of reference and UN resolutions and the Arab Peace Initiative and under the sole auspices of the Middle East Quartet. Ladies and gentlemen, to ensure that our initiative is time-bound, we give Israel the occupying power 1 year to withdraw from the Palestinian territories it occupied in 1967, including East Jerusalem, and we are ready to work throughout this year on the delineation of borders and solving all final status issues under the auspices of the International Quartet and in accordance with UN resolutions. If this is not achieved, why maintain recognition of Israel based on the 1967 borders? Why maintain this recognition? Moreover, we would go to the International Court of Justice as the highest international judicial body to adjudicate over the legitimacy of the occupation of the land of the Palestinian state and the relevant obligations for the United Nations and states around the world in this regard. All parties will have to abide by the verdict of the court. Colonialism, occupation, and apartheid are prohibited under international law, and they are crimes that must be confronted. A structure that needs to be dismantled. The international community's support for this initiative, consistent with international law and United Nations resolutions, may save the region from a grim, unknown fate. We all have a chance to live in peace and security, to have good neighborly relations, to live each in their own state, and delaying the implementation of these steps will keep the region in a situation of turmoil and instability with dire consequences. Do the leaders of Israel dream of maintaining their occupation forever? Do they want this occupation to last forever? Ladies and gentlemen, why should Palestinians continue living either under Israel's racist occupation or as refugees in neighboring countries? Are there no other alternatives? Freedom, for instance? Palestinians everywhere are creative, innovative, hardworking, dynamic people, and the entire world can testify to that. Palestinians deserve to live free in their homeland. From this podium, I call on the sons and daughters of Palestine everywhere around the world to continue their peaceful and popular struggle that has shown the true image of the valiant Palestinian people striving for freedom and independence by resisting occupation and apartheid. I salute our people everywhere, and salute all nations and countries that have stood in solidarity with our people during the Jerusalem uprising and the prisoners' uprising, and against the aggression that claimed the lives of hundreds, that spread destruction and displaced thousands of our people in the West Bank, Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. I also salute all those who took part in demonstrations in the United States, and Europe, and everywhere across the globe to demand an end to the Israeli occupation, apartheid, and ethnic cleansing, and to call for justice, freedom, and self-determination for our people. This is a burgeoning awakening to get to know the true Palestinian story, and I urge you all to continue defending the true story and defending the Palestinians' rights to freedom, equality, and statehood. Criticizing the aggressive policies and practices of the Israeli occupation and settlers, and of the Zionist narrative in general, is not an act of incitement or anti-Semitism, but rather a duty of every free man and woman in the world. In this connection, I convey to the international community our gratitude and appreciation for their political and material support to our people, and for the building of our institutions and national economy. But the time has come to take tangible steps to revive hope and end the Israeli occupation of our land and people, and to consolidate the values of justice and peace in our region. I wonder, what prevents countries that recognize Israel from recognizing the state of Palestine, since they support the two-state solution? And I say to Israel's leaders, do not oppress and corner the Palestinian people, do not deprive the Palestinian people of dignity, of the right to their land and state, as you will destroy thereby everything. Our patience and the patience of our people is running out. I reiterate yet again that the Palestinian people will defend their existence, their identity, and will not surrender, will not kneel. They will not leave. They will remain on their land, defending it, defending their faith, pursuing the great journey towards ending the occupation. The occupation of the land of the state of Palestine and its capital, East Jerusalem. We say once again, this is our land, our Jerusalem, our Palestinian identity, and we shall defend it until the occupier leaves, as the future belongs to us. And you cannot claim peace and security for yourselves alone. Let us be. Peace be upon you.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the State of Palestine for the statement just made. We shall continue with the general debate. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Charles Michel, President of the European Council of the European Union. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Charles Michel, President of the European Council of the European Union, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Madame la Présidente, Monsieur le Secrétaire Général, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs les délégués, Nadia Mourad est née en Irak. Nadia Mourad est yézidi. Et le 15 août 2014, sa vie va basculer. Des djihadistes attaquent son village. 6 parmi ses frères sont assassinés sous ses yeux.
before her
Pour
very
la dernière
eyes.
fois,
And for the last,
elle verra sa mère ce
she saw
jour-là.
her mother at that
Elle sera
time for the last
capturée
time.
pour
She was
devenir une esclave
captured to
sexuelle
become a sexual
et elle
slave,
subira
and
les
she
sévices les plus
endured
immondes.
the basest
Elle finira par
atrocities,
s'échapper.
and she ultimately escaped.
Aujourd'hui,
Today,
Nadia Mourad est prix
Nadia
Nobel de la
Mourad
paix
is a Nobel
et elle
Peace
se bat sans
laureate,
relâche pour les
and
droits
she is
et la
fighting
dignité des femmes. Et je veux,
indefatigably
à
for
cette
the rights and
tribune,
dignity of women. I wish to
citer les
take this
propos qu'elle a exprimés il y a
opportunity
quelques jours
from
à
here
peine.
to quote
Aujourd'hui,
her.
nous voyons le prix des
I
conflits
quote,
marqués
today we
sur les
have
corps des
seen the
femmes
price of
en
conflict
Irak,
marked on women's
en
bodies in
Afghanistan,
Iraq, in
dans le
Afghanistan,
Tigré
in
et
the
dans tant
Tigris,
d'autres
and
endroits.
in many
Tant de
other
potentiel est
areas.
perdu
So
lorsque
much
l'on ignore le
potential
pouvoir
has
des
been
femmes
lost,
dans la
but if
prévention des
we
conflits
disregard the
et la
power of women
reconstruction
in
des
conflict
communautés.
prevention
Fin
and
de
rebuilding
citation.
communities. End of
Mesdames
quote.
et messieurs, j'ai
Ladies and
rencontré Nadia
gentlemen,
Mourad.
I met with
J'ai vu dans
Nadia
ses yeux
Mourad,
toute la force
and
de
I saw
l'humanité.
in her eyes
J'ai
all
entendu
of
dans
the
la
strength
douceur
of
de sa
humanity.
voix
I
une
heard
absolue
in
détermination.
the softness of
Elle
her
a
voice
décidé
utter
de puiser dans le
determination.
drame
She decided
et
to
dans l'infinie
draw
souffrance une
from
force
the
inébranlable
tragedy,
pour transformer le monde.
and she drew
transformer
from
le
this
monde.
tragedy an
Et c'est
unshakable
habité
strength to
par
transform the world, to
l'inspiration
transform
de
the
Nadia
world.
Mourad
And it is thus
que je m'adresse à vous
inspired,
aujourd'hui.
inspired by Madame Mourad, that I address
Ladies and
you
gentlemen,
today. Ladies and gentlemen,
the European Union was forged by Europeans, like an irrepressible surge of dignity and freedom after two bloody world wars. Today, we face another turning point in human history because we are entrenched in another war, a global war. And this global war has no opposing sides, no armies, no land is lost or conquered. Yet, this war destroys lives, brings countries to their knees, and unimaginable suffering to families. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking about the war that we humans have waged against nature. We have tortured our planet, abused our natural resources. We have committed acts of war against our environment. And now, nature is fighting back, bringing us back to our senses, back to humility. No one can say, I didn't know. For decades, scientists have sounded the alarm, but their warnings fell on deaf ears. We turned away so as not to see, and today the shock is brutal. We are reaping what we have sown. The fires that have devastated Australia, the droughts that have ravished Africa, the floods that have scarred Europe, and the hurricanes that have battered the United States. There is another scourge that has afflicted our planet for nearly 2 years. This also predicted by science, COVID-19. It has killed 4.7 million people and shattered the lives of billions more. But this pandemic has also led us back to the essential, life and human dignity. And to safeguard these, we have taken exceptional measures, massive confinements that have brought our economies, our social lives, and more seriously, our freedoms to a near standstill. This pandemic has opened our eyes to the obvious. Our lives and our health are inextricably linked to the health of our fields, forests, oceans, and fauna. We share our planet with other living beings, and it's time. It's time to stop waging war against nature. It's time for humans to sign an armistice with nature, a peace treaty with our planet for the generations to come. It's time for us to transform the world, just as the previous generation did after the last World War. Inspired by the visionary signatories of the United Nations Charter, it's time to get back to basics, reason, and good judgment. Inspired by these principles, they left us an international order based on rules to promote peace. They built liberal democracies to guarantee the dignity of each individual. They championed the development model based on the freedom to trade and to pursue economic opportunity to ensure prosperity. And these choices have ushered in progress and greater stability. But the world of yesterday is not that of today, and even less the world of tomorrow. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, brutal unilateralism too often elbows out multilateralism. The ambition to dominate creates new dependencies and leads to tensions and conflicts. Democracies are under pressure, both from within and from without. Authoritarian regimes openly or not meticulously undermine the principles of freedom at home and even beyond their borders. And finally, our model of economic development has run its course. Its flaws are increasingly visible: the extreme exploitation of resources and increasing inequality. We must escape this vicious circle. Excellencies, ladies, gentlemen, we are indeed at an inflection point, and we must ask ourselves, what world do we want for tomorrow? We want a world inspired by wisdom, a world that trusts in science, that guarantees the dignity and freedom of every human being. We want a fairer and a safer world. We want cooperation rather than confrontation, solidarity rather than isolation, transparency, not secrecy. And we want loyalty, honoring our word when our word is given. Mesdames et messieurs, vous pouvez compter sur l'Union européenne en soutenant l'agenda 2030 et les objectifs de développement durable et en pleine confiance avec le secrétaire général Guterres. Un monde plus juste, c'est un monde où nous sommes tous protégés du Covid-19. L'Union européenne a souhaité soutenir massivement la recherche et développer des capacités importantes de production de vaccins. Nous avons exporté 700 millions de doses dans 130 pays et 3 milliards d'euros ont été investis dans COVAX. Nous devons le reconnaître. L'écart de vaccination avec les pays en développement n'est pas acceptable et nous devons agir plus vigoureusement encore. Nous avons lancé des projets concrets. 1 milliard d'euros a été mobilisé pour développer des capacités de production pharmaceutique, y compris vaccinale, dans plusieurs pays africains, et nous sommes aussi prêts à soutenir des partenariats en Amérique latine. Enfin, nous savons qu'il ne suffira pas de vaincre cette pandémie-ci. Il faudra prévenir les prochaines et renforcer la résilience du monde entier. Et c'est l'objectif du traité international sur les pandémies que nous avons proposé avec le Dr Tedros Ghebreyesus. Et j'encourage ici chacun à soutenir au plus vite le lancement des négociations. Un monde plus juste, un monde plus sûr, c'est aussi un monde libéré de la menace climatique. Il nous faut des objectifs ambitieux. L'accord de Paris a été une étape majeure et l'Union européenne a été un acteur de poids. Contrairement à d'autres, nous avons tenu bon pour défendre cet accord et les 27 chefs d'État et de gouvernement, il y a 2 ans, ont montré le chemin en prenant l'engagement de la neutralité climat en 2050 pour l'Union européenne. D'autres suivent cet exemple et dans ce même esprit, l'Union européenne a décidé de rehausser ses objectifs à l'horizon 2030. On doit bien sûr progresser dans la coopération internationale. Nous pensons que nous devons aller vers la tarification du carbone. Nous l'avons entamé à notre niveau avec le système d'échange d'émissions ETS parce que nous pensons que cette approche stimule l'innovation, produit des résultats et encourage l'économie circulaire. Ensuite, bien sûr, il est impératif de développer davantage les investissements dans le verdissement de l'économie et nous souhaitons pouvoir développer des approches globales pour fixer un cadre réglementaire à la finance verte. Enfin, dans cette Assemblée, nous le savons, tout le monde n'est pas égal dans la course contre la montre du réchauffement.
Are equal in the race against time vis-à-vis global warming. Industrialized countries shoulder particular responsibility in supporting developing countries. And since the pledge in 2019-2020 to mobilize $100 billion additional dollars to finance the international fight against global warming, since then few have honored their word. From 2013 to 2019, the EU and member states have disbursed 127 billion euros. That is 1/3 of the total. And the commitment, and we call upon other partners to honor their pledges as well. It is a question of trust and a question of equality. Ladies and gentlemen,
un monde plus juste
a fairer
et un monde plus sûr,
a safer and more secure world is also a world in peace.
Même,
at this very moment,
sont brutalisées.
Are
sont violées
brutalized.
parce
They're
qu'elles sont
being
des femmes.
raped because
Et cette
they
arme
are
de guerre
women. And this weapon of war is used, in particularly in the Horn of Africa, in Ethiopia. We call for a ceasefire and an immediate end to ethnic violence. Access to humanitarian assistance needs to be provided without any obstacles.
Le radicalisme sont deux fléaux qui se nourrissent mutuellement.
Which l'éducation,
one another. Les services de base, la santé, les infrastructures sont, nous le savons, les meilleurs remèdes contre l'instabilité et contre les dangers qui y sont liés. Au Sahel, l'Union européenne et 9 de nos États membres sont mobilisés auprès des populations pour des raisons de sécurité, de défense et pour l'aide au développement. Mais bien sûr, restaurer l'autorité de l'État, garantir la gouvernance sont indispensables pour engranger des résultats durables. Mesdames et messieurs, chers collègues, la situation nouvelle en Afghanistan est un échec pour la communauté internationale et des enseignements doivent en être tirés. Mais une chose est sûre, la fin des opérations militaires n'est pas la fin de l'engagement européen auprès des Afghanes et des Afghans. Nous voulons éviter toute catastrophe humanitaire, préserver autant que possible les acquis des 20 dernières années, spécialement pour les droits des femmes et des jeunes filles. Dans la région Indo-Pacifique, l'Union européenne est le premier investisseur et l'un des plus importants partenaires commerciaux. 40% de notre commerce y transite. Et nous avons décidé d'y renforcer massivement. Notre coopération, c'est le sens du partenariat désormais stratégique avec l'ASEAN. La sécurité et la liberté de navigation en mer de Chine méridionale et dans l'océan Indien doivent être garanties conformément au droit international et l'Union européenne est prête à y prendre sa pleine part de responsabilité. Mesdames et messieurs, jamais l'Union européenne ne baissera les yeux face aux violations des droits humains. L'état de droit, la non-discrimination, le respect des minorités, y compris LGBTQI, sont des valeurs cardinales. Et c'est le sens du dialogue droits de l'homme que nous menons avec de nombreux pays dans le monde. Nous défendons fermement nos valeurs, mais bien sûr nous sommes prêts aussi à être engagés et à dialoguer afin de relever les défis globaux comme le climat, la biodiversité ou la lutte contre les pandémies. La paix, c'est bien plus que l'absence de la guerre. La paix n'est jamais acquise. Elle se façonne au quotidien. Elle se nourrit par les connexions mutuelles entre nos sociétés et plus nous partageons d'intérêts, moins nous entrons en conflit. Les échanges économiques, scientifiques, culturels, intellectuels sont des ferments puissants pour la stabilité et cela passe par les projets d'intégration régionale ou continentale. Cela passe aussi par les grands partenariats entre ces nouveaux espaces intégrés, que ce soit en Amérique latine, aux Caraïbes, en Asie et aussi en Afrique. Avec nos frères africains, nous travaillons d'arrache-pied pour une nouvelle alliance avec le continent africain. Écoute, respect mutuel, prise en compte des spécificités et des réalités, transparence, gouvernance de part et d'autre doivent en être la marque de fabrique. Nous mobiliserons les secteurs privés pour investir dans les infrastructures et les nouvelles technologies. Nous soutiendrons tous les efforts pour promouvoir l'éducation, parce que l'éducation, c'est le plus sûr levier pour offrir un avenir meilleur. Nos intérêts communs sont un moteur robuste pour faire réussir le nouveau logiciel de notre partenariat. Mesdames et messieurs, l'Union européenne et nos États membres sommes une des principales puissances économiques dans le monde. Et nous sommes aussi le premier sponsor de la paix et du développement durable. Nous finançons avec les États membres un quart du budget de l'Organisation des Nations Unies, 30% du budget total de maintien de la paix et la moitié de l'aide au développement mondial. C'est un choix délibéré et c'est un choix cohérent avec notre vision du monde ouvert et interconnecté. Nous avons des valeurs à promouvoir, des citoyens à protéger, des intérêts à défendre. Et c'est dans cet esprit que nous développons l'autonomie stratégique de l'Union européenne, y compris dans nos capacités de sécurité et de défense, pour être moins dépendants, pour renforcer notre influence positive et aussi pour consolider notre alliance atlantique. Cette alliance qui est ancrée dans nos valeurs démocratiques et qui est un pilier inébranlable de notre sécurité et de la stabilité dans le monde. Des alliés plus forts font une alliance plus forte dans la transparence et la loyauté. Notre influence positive, nous voulons bien entendu aussi l'approfondir dans notre voisinage immédiat. C'est le sens du partenariat oriental qui est un engagement de long terme avec l'Ukraine, la Géorgie, la Moldavie, l'Arménie et l'Azerbaïdjan. C'est aussi le sens de notre soutien à la population bélarusse et de notre fermeté vis-à-vis du régime de M. Loukachenko, notamment lorsqu'il tente d'instrumentaliser les migrants comme arme hybride pour déstabiliser les membres de l'Union européenne. Enfin, c'est le sens du travail que nous effectuons afin de resserrer les liens avec les pays des Balkans occidentaux. Le récent regain de violence au Proche-Orient a été un nouveau rappel de la nécessité absolue de reprendre le dialogue pacifique vers la solution à deux États entre Israël et la Palestine. Mesdames et messieurs, chers collègues, transformer le monde, le rendre plus juste et plus sûr, garantir la dignité de chacun, voilà la promesse. Voilà le serment des Nations Unies. Il nous appartient à tous d'être à la hauteur de cet engagement, de cette ambition pour toutes les Nadia Mourad de ce monde et pour les générations qui vont nous suivre. Vous pouvez compter sur l'Union européenne. Je vous remercie.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the European Council of the European Union for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by Her Excellency Isatou Touré, Vice President of the Republic of the Gambia. May I request protocol to escort Her Excellency. I have great pleasure in welcoming Her Excellency Isatou Touré, Vice President of the Republic of the Gambia, and I invite her to address the General Assembly.
Mr. President, the Secretary General, Your Majesties, distinguished heads of state and government, ladies and gentlemen, once again, we thank Almighty Allah for making it possible for us to gather in person in this august assembly to collectively discuss and find solutions to our shared challenges as members of the international community. This is even more important today as we strive to overcome the challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. On behalf of His Excellency, President Adama Barrow, and the entire people of the Gambia, let me express our sincere gratitude to His Excellency Volkan Bozkir for his excellent leadership during the 75th session of the General Assembly. Similarly, Mr. President, the Gambia welcomes your presidency of the General Assembly with renewed hope and enthusiasm for what we can collectively accomplish during the 76th session. We are optimistic that the 5 points agenda encapsulated in your presidency of hope would enable us to deliver to the satisfaction of our global body. Let me assure you of my delegation's unflinching support and cooperation during your tenure. We also commend the Secretary General for his sterling leadership and reform initiatives during one of the most difficult moments when the world is facing an unprecedented health, socio-economic, and environmental crisis. Mr. President, I bring you warmest greetings from His Excellency Mr. Adama Barrow, President of the Republic of the Gambia, who would have loved to be here in person, but due to urgent state matters could not, and has asked that I extend his best wishes for a successful 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Mr. President, the importance of the theme that you have chosen for our general debate, building resilience through hope to recover from COVID-19, rebuild sustainability, respond to the needs of the planet, respect the rights of people, and revitalize the United Nations cannot be overemphasized. The challenges we face today as the international community requires resilience building, recovery from COVID-19, while building sustainability in response to the needs of our planet and its people. This would require having a revitalized United Nations that is fit for purpose. Mr. President, today, Africa in general is grappling with negative effects of conflict and insecurity. The challenge of addressing the root causes of conflict and climate change require greater global solidarity and UN leadership. Apart from the heavy cost in human and material terms, conflicts impede production, damage infrastructure, prevent the reliable delivery of social services, and disrupt the growth of societies. Due to conflict in the continent, poverty continues to be perpetuated with a negative impact on our collective strive for sustainable peace and security. The socio-economic conditions and the governance and security situation in the Sahel continues to alarm us. A more urgent and holistic response to the problems of the Sahel is currently needed. Without a stable Sahel, the West African region will lag in its development aspirations. In Africa today, there is undisputed recognition of strong interlinkages between peace and development, with studies confirming that armed conflicts remain a major obstacle to development in the continent. Against this background, my delegation calls on the international community to come together and act coherently to address the root causes of conflicts and recovery in Africa by adopting new approaches and narratives that suit the demands of our times. The international community should intensify its collective efforts to accelerate progress towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and the goals and targets of Agenda 2063, including silencing the guns in Africa. We must equally strengthen the partnership between the United Nations and the African Union in formulating joint responses to existing and emerging threats to peace, security, and development in the continent. We call on the United Nations and the rest of the international community to help in building resilience and sustainability in Africa by promoting global engagement and actions around issues of health, education, COVID-19 recovery, vaccine accessibility, democracy, social protection, human capital development, with a view to consolidating regional integration. We must continue to accelerate structural transformation while promoting industrialization in the continent. Furthermore, our partners should adopt a conflict-sensitive lens to development programming in Africa, including approaches that would prioritize prevention, stabilization, transformation, and sustainability to help African countries in their post-pandemic recovery and long-term development. Mr. President, like the rest of the global community, we are deeply concerned about the challenges of vaccine access and equity, abject poverty, the crushing debt crisis, and youth unemployment. Building back better from COVID-19, reviving the momentum towards achieving the SDGs, as well as addressing ongoing development challenges, would require extraordinary international engagement and solidarity. For our continent, delays in addressing these challenges would continue to have devastating consequences on our economies. We are calling for a new strategic orientation and partnership that would accelerate recovery from the pandemic. In our view, Building Back Better initiatives should focus on job creation, digitalization, increased SDG financing, strengthened health systems, scientific research, and increased utilization of local experts in program and project intervention in the continent. Global recovery will only be achieved when vaccine equity, availability, and accessibility are adequately addressed in all countries, big or small, developed or developing. Mr. President, as we continue to count on the UN development system for a renewed development partnership in this decade of action to help us address our development challenges, we call on partners to increase their funding without heavy earmarking. The UN agencies and other development partners need funding, flexibility, and predictability to deliver programs that support building prosperous and structurally transformed economies that leave no one behind, especially the LDCs and the middle-income countries. Mr. President, while the COVID-19 pandemic has undoubtedly exacerbated human suffering in all spheres, it has also challenged us to mobilize all efforts and resources to address the eradication of poverty and inequalities through collective action and a renewed momentum towards achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Mr. President, the pandemic has exposed existing fragilities and vulnerabilities and disrupted economic activities and employment, causing a sharp reduction in revenues and ability to achieve the SDGs, given the fall in growth of Africa's gross domestic product on an estimated minus 3.4% in 2020. At the national level, the government of the Gambia recently completed the midterm review of the National Development Plan 2018 to 2021 to take stock of the successes and gaps that exist. In light of the review, we are taking concrete steps to redefine the strategic priorities of the NDP in view of new challenges resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic. We convey our appreciation to the United Nations and all development partners for providing us with timely, innovative, and critical support during the pandemic, which helped in ensuring government business continuity, provision of social protection, and the strengthening of our healthcare system. Mr. President, the COVID-19 pandemic continues to have significant socioeconomic impact on the LDCs, which must be reversed through new and innovative programs, policies, and financing to help them recover and build back better inclusively. With the preparation of the 5th UN Conference on the LDCs currently underway, it will be important for the international community to calibrate and commit to concrete actions that will support a resilient recovery and the attainment of the SDGs in this decade. As an LDC, the Gambia believes it is crucial for governments to be equipped with necessary tools and adequate resources to finance our development priorities. And this is what we are articulating as part of the LDC 5 process. Mr. President, as the state of our collective security continues to be tested by unprecedented threats and challenges, so has the call to action become more urgent for the international community to support the efforts of the UN Security Council in the maintenance of international peace and security. In this regard, United Nations peacekeeping operations has proven to be the organization's strongest instrument and most impactful tool in assisting countries' transition from conflict to peace. UN peacekeeping deserves our renewed support and participation. The government of the Gambia has consistently demonstrated its commitment to UN peacekeeping through its contribution to troops and police to various missions, with an ever-improving level of performance, discipline, and commitment. We continue to enhance our participation by deploying more women peacekeepers, better training in areas requiring critical skill sets, and forging partnerships with stakeholders to expand our participation in more peacekeeping missions. Mr. President, once again, with the support of all our friends, the Gambia continues to progress on a positive and upward trajectory. The government's policies and approach continues to be guided by our awareness of the difficult history that we traveled as a country to usher in democracy. The Gambia is at a crossroad as we continue to seek national reconciliation, entrench our democracy, and consolidate the rule of law. We are on the verge of organizing presidential elections in December 2021 and legislative elections in 2022. No effort will be spared by the government in ensuring that these elections are held under free and fair conditions as we march towards the next phase of a political transition. We are going into these elections with the knowledge that our journey towards reform and transformation is in the area of good governance, transitional justice, or the civil service and security sector is an ongoing one. Our gratitude goes to our partners who continue to accompany us in our sustaining peace and peace-building efforts. Mr. President, developments within the international community continue to be a matter of concern to my delegation. On Palestine, we must always remember that peace and security in Palestine and Israel means peace and security for the Middle East region and the world at large. It is therefore imperative for the international community to encourage genuine dialogue with a view to ending the deadlock. We must intensify efforts to bring both sides of the conflict to the negotiating table. Use of force and violence will only add to the suffering of the people living in the area. We continue to be deeply traumatized by the negative consequences of this conflict and cannot continue to ignore the humanitarian catastrophe that goes with it. Mr. President, it is our strong view that peaceful coexistence is the only viable way forward. Therefore, ending occupation, impunity, upholding international law, lifting of blockades on the Gaza Strip, addressing the dire humanitarian and refugee crisis, and having an independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital should be urgently pursued by all and sundry. A new peace and political process must be launched by the quartet. Mr. President, since we last met in this August Assembly, the plight of the Rohingya Muslim minority in Myanmar and elsewhere has not improved. The Gambia will continue to pursue the case at the International Court of Justice, ICJ, till the victims of the atrocity crimes receive justice. The international community must not relent in its quest for accountability in alleviating the dire circumstances of the Rohingya victims' communities. Mr. President, the Gambia believes in friendly relations between states as the bedrock of international solidarity and cooperation. In this regard, we call on the United States to end the embargo against Cuba and pursue meaningful cooperation with its government and people. Let the embargo be a relic of history. Furthermore, Mr. President, the Gambia is strongly committed to the principles of recognizing one China. This is a cardinal principle of our foreign policy, which hinges on further strengthening our excellent bilateral relations on the basis of mutual respect, sovereign equality, and shared prosperity, a win-win approach. Mr. President, we are aware of the geopolitical competition for influence by regional and global powers. But as small states members of the United Nations, we are more interested in seeing you cooperating more in fighting poverty, climate change, conflicts, and global insecurity. We want to see a world of shared prosperity and innovation. We share one planet, and we owe it to posterity to leave it in a better shape. Let us eliminate this pandemic together and build forward better by leaving no one behind. Mr. President, the biggest lesson we have learned from the pandemic is that no one is safe without the other, and that our institutions are not fit for purpose. We must use the lessons of this pandemic to engender critical reforms of our institutions so that we are better prepared for the next pandemic, climate event, or humanitarian catastrophe. The United Nations Development System is currently undergoing critical reforms, and we are happy that it is adapting in ways that are contributing to the mitigation of the impact of COVID-19 in the developing country. Mr. President, one of the last holdouts of reform is the United Nations Security Council. Africa's quest for greater representation on the Security Council is legitimate, just, and overdue. We must not relent until our demands are met and fulfilled. We want to have a greater voice in deciding issues that affect us. We call on all true friends of Africa to support our demands based on the Ezulwini Consensus and the Sirt Declaration. Once again, on behalf of the President Barrow and the government of the people of Gambia, I extend sincere gratitude and appreciation to all our bilateral and multilateral development partners for accompanying us on our march towards greater democracy, good governance, development, and prosperity. I wish you all a successful 76th session of the General Assembly.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank Her Excellency Essatou Touré, Vice President of the Republic of the Gambia, for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort Her Excellency. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Benin to introduce an address by the Vice President.
Excellences, Monsieur le Président de l'Assemblée générale,
Mr. President of the General
Excellences,
Assembly,
Mesdames et Messieurs les chefs d'État, de gouvernement et de délégation,
heads of delegations,
Excellences, Madame la Vice-Secrétaire générale des Nations Unies, distingués délégués, Mesdames et Messieurs,
Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce to this august assembly
Madame Mariam Chabi-Talata,
Ms. Miriam
Vice-Présidente de la République du Bénin, à qui il revient le privilège de délivrer à l'Assemblée générale le message que lui adresse M. Patrice Talon, Président de la République du Bénin, chef de l'État, chef du gouvernement. Madame la Vice-Présidente de la République, vous avez toute l'attention de la 76e session de l'Assemblée générale des Nations Unies.
Monsieur le Président de l'Assemblée générale des Nations Unies,
Your Excellency, President of the United Nations General Assembly,
Mesdames et Messieurs les chefs d'État et de gouvernement,
heads of state and government,
Excellences, Monsieur le Secrétaire
Your
général des
Excellency,
Nations
Secretary
Unies,
General of the United Nations,
Mesdames et Messieurs,
ladies and
Son
gentlemen,
Excellence, Monsieur Patrice
His
Talon,
Excellency Mr. Patrice
Président de la
Talon, President
République du
of
Bénin,
the Republic of
empêché
Benin, who
m'a chargé
is
de
unable to
délivrer
attend, has
en
instructed
son
me
nom
to deliver
l'allocution dont la
the
teneur
following
suit.
statement on his
Je
behalf.
cite, Je voudrais,
Unquote.
avant tout propos,
I would like
Monsieur le
to
Président,
begin, Mr. President,
vous remercier
by
pour
thanking you
l'excellente qualité
for the
de la conduite des
excellent
travaux
conduct of the work
de
of
cette
this
76e
76th session
session de l'Assemblée
of the
générale
United
des
Nations
Nations
General
Unies.
Assembly.
Le thème de la présente
The
session
theme
est
of this session is
construire la résilience par
building
l'espoir
resilience through hope
pour se remettre de la
to recover from
COVID-19,
COVID-19,
reconstruire durablement,
rebuild sustainably,
répondre aux besoins de la planète,
respond to the needs of the planet,
respecter les droits des personnes
respect the
et
rights of people,
revitaliser les Nations
and
Unies.
revitalize the United Nations.
Quand on observe en effet l'état actuel du monde,
When we observe the
sur
current
différents
state of the
plans,
world
on
on different
reconnaît
levels,
que ce
we
thème est très
recognize that
significatif,
this theme
parlant
is
et
indeed
adapté
very
à nos
significant,
vécus.
meaningful, and in line with
Il
our
nous
experiences.
à nous départir du
It
scepticisme
invites us to
ambiant
let
et
go of
croissant,
the ever-present
du
and growing
désespoir qui gagne de
skepticism, of
plus
the
en plus nos
despair
cœurs
that is increasingly
pour
gaining ground in our
solutionner nos
hearts
problèmes
in
actuels
order to solve
et
our
nous
current
reconstruire
problems
durablement.
and rebuild sustainably.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr.
depuis
President,
quelque temps déjà,
for
la
some
communauté
time now, the
internationale
international
est
community
confrontée à la
has
réalité
been
globale
facing
et
the
destructrice
global and
que constitue
destructive
la
reality
pandémie de la
of the
COVID-19.
COVID-19 pandemic.
À cet égard,
In this regard, my country appreciates the high priority accorded by the United Nations and its specialized agencies, in particular the World Health Organization, to the search for a definitive solution to this health crisis. Broad and ongoing mobilization, as well as the pooling of efforts, have enabled the development of vaccines. Immunization rates across the world are fairly high, even if Africa still has a low vaccination rate and continues to face other infections which are just as deadly, such as malaria and HIV/AIDS. Regarding our national management of COVID-19, the state of Benin has opted for the comprehensive vaccination of all citizens, as well as granting subsidies of several billion CFA francs to people and companies whose activities have been impacted by the pandemic. Here, I would like to thank all the partners who have supported our country in its fight to achieve the SDGs in line with the government's action program. Regarding the need to rebuild sustainably, for us, this is a matter of working to anticipate the occurrence of future calamities. Isolated, one-off local actions alone are no longer enough. Each state, each continent must open up to others so that through coordinated joint efforts, through synergies of action, the world can definitively and permanently rid itself of its fears. As for the insecurity generated by violent extremism and banditry, my country faces two situations with crisis-generating potential: the terrorist threat, which constitutes a real danger to its northern borders, and maritime piracy in the south. To cope with this, in addition to taking the necessary measures domestically, Benin is joining all initiatives at the regional and international level in order to guarantee peace, free movement, and security to all its citizens and all those living on its territory. The same is also true for the needs of the planet. The same kind of attitude and behavior are hoped for, are expected to save a planet subjected to all sorts of abuse, overexploitation, excesses of production and consumption. We must go beyond our individual sovereignties and force ourselves to plan all actions relating to the needs of countries and the planet together. Meeting food needs, water and energy needs, needs that I would call strategic, must be done taking into account current threats and future generations. Turning now to respect for human rights, the SDGs remind us of them daily through the goals adopted by all of us. Our country believes that achieving the SDGs is the most concrete and surest way to respect human rights. This is why Benin is endeavoring through different strategies to mobilize resources that would enable our fellow citizens to have access to an adequate food system with school canteens throughout the entire country, quality lifelong education, healthcare through the insurance for strengthening human capital system, which protects the most disadvantaged, drinking water by extending our distribution networks, energy by extending the electricity network and expanding clean energies. Today, thanks to the successful issuance of SDG Eurobonds, our country has been able to mobilize most of the resources needed to achieve the majority of the SDGs. At the political level, with the reform of the party system, the regular organization of elections, good governance, and fighting corruption, Benin guarantees its citizens the enjoyment of human rights.
Les progrès
Mr.
réalisés
President,
par notre pays sont
the
sensibles,
progress made by our
palpables,
country in
concrets
recent
ces
years
dernières
is
années
tangible,
et nous pousse à
palpable,
estimer que
concrete,
nous méritons pour cela
and it leads
de
us to
siéger au
believe
sein
that
du
due to this,
Conseil
we
des
deserve
droits
a
de
seat on
l'homme
the
des
United
Nations
Nations
Unies
Human Rights
au titre de
Council
la période
for the period
2022-2024 en vue du partage de nos
2022-2024 so
expériences
that we can
de
share our
protection et de
experiences
promotion des droits humains.
in the
Cette
protection and
tribune est
promotion of
donc
human
pour moi
rights.
une
Speaking
occasion
from this rostrum is
solennelle de
therefore a
rappeler
solemn
que la
occasion for me to
candidature de
recall
notre
that
pays
our country's
a déjà
candidacy
été
has already
formellement
been
endossée
formally
par l'Union
endorsed by
africaine.
the African
Fort de
Union.
cet appui de proximité,
Backed by this
nous
support
invitons
from our
également
continent, we also
l'ensemble des
invite
pays
all
membres des
member
Nations Unies
states of the
à
United
soutenir la
Nations
candidature
to
béninoise
support
lors
Benin's
des
candidacy
élections qui
during the
auront lieu
elections to be
à New
held
York
in New
en
York
octobre 2021.
in October
Monsieur le
2021.
Président, enfin,
Mr.
sur la
President,
question de la revitalisation des
finally,
Nations
on the
Unies,
question of the
il faut
revitalization of the
absolument
United
une réforme de
Nations, a reform
l'institution
of the
avec pour
institution is
socle
absolutely
l'égalité,
necessary,
la
one that is
justice et
founded
la
on the principles of
solidarité
equality,
entre les
justice,
États
and
membres.
solidarity
Les
between
temps
member
ont changé,
states.
le monde a
Times have
évolué,
changed,
notre
the
institution
world has
doit aussi
changed,
évoluer,
and
s'adapter
our
à son
organization
temps.
must also
Nous en
change and
appelons à
adapt to
l'esprit
the
de consensus
times.
de tous.
We
Pour faire
appeal
des
to the spirit
Nations
of
Unies
universal
une
consensus to make the
institution
United
moderne,
Nations a
libre
modern,
et juste.
free,
En
and
attendant
just
cette échéance,
institution.
mon pays
In the
réaffirme
meantime,
son
my country
soutien
reaffirms
aux
its support
initiatives
for
diplomatiques
diplomatic
visant la
initiatives
création d'un
aimed
État
at the
palestinien
creation
viable,
of a
doté des
viable
attributs de la
Palestinian
pleine
state endowed
souveraineté
with the attributes of full
internationale et
international
vivant dans une
sovereignty
coexistence pacifique
and coexisting
avec l'État
peacefully with the state
d'Israël.
of
Le
Israel.
Bénin soutient également les
Benin
efforts
also
des
supports
Nations
the efforts of
Unies
the United
destinés
Nations
à trouver
to
une
find
solution
a definitive solution
définitive à la
to
question
the
du
question
Sahara
of Western
occidental.
Sahara.
Mon pays, enfin, reste solidaire
Finally, my
de la
country remains in
résolution adoptée
solidarity
par le
with the resolution
34e
adopted
sommet
by the
de l'Union
34th Summit
africaine
of the
en février
African Union in
2021
February
à
21
Addis
in Addis
Abeba
Abeba
sur le blocus
regarding
économique
the
imposé à
economic
Cuba.
blockade imposed on
Et les
Cuba
États-Unis d'Amérique réaffirment la nécessité d'y
by the
mettre un
United
terme
States and
au
reaffirms the
nom
need
de
to
la
put an end
promotion de
to
la
it in the
paix
name of
et du
promoting peace and
développement.
development.
Le Bénin en appelle donc
Benin
à
therefore
la
calls for the
normalisation des
normalization of
relations
relations
entre
between
Cuba
Cuba
et
and the
les
United
États-Unis,
States,
qui sont deux pays
two countries
amis du
that
Bénin.
are friends
Notre
of Benin.
attente, puisqu'il faut
Our
vivre
hope,
d'espoir,
because one must
c'est que
always
ces
live with
différents
hope,
appels
is
lancés
that the various
ici
appeals
soient
made
entendus
here
par tous
will be heeded by
pour
all
l'avènement d'un
in order
monde
to bring about a
moderne,
world
uni,
that
libre,
is
juste,
modern, united,
sécurisé
free,
et prospère
just,
pour
safe,
tous.
and
Fin
prosperous
de
for
citation.
everyone.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the Vice President of the Republic of Benin for the statement just made. The Assembly will hear an address by Her Excellency Rebecca Nyandang de Mabior, Vice President of the Republic of South Sudan. May I request protocol to escort Her Excellency. I have great pleasure in welcoming Her Excellency Rebecca Nyandeng de Mabio, Vice President of the Republic of South Sudan, and I invite her to address the General Assembly. Madam.
Your Excellency, President of the General Assembly, Your Excellency, Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellencies, heads of the delegation, and fellow delegates, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of President, His Excellency Salva Kiir Mayardit, I stand before you to share the recent development in our country. I intend to do so in the spirit of constructive engagement. On July 9, 2011, we emerged from a long liberation struggle against oppression and domination. After 10 years of independence, we remain on a path of nation building founded on the vision and inspiration of our liberation struggle and what we have committed for ourselves under the revitalized agreement on the resolution of the conflicts in South Sudan that was realized through the support of the UN, the AU, and key friendly nations. While our determination to fulfill to implement the provision of the agreement has been impacted by many challenges,
foremost of which is the global COVID-19 pandemic outbreak and the limited resources needed for its implementation. It has enabled the formation of an inclusive transitional government of national unity, the establishment and operation of local governments, and setting up of the transitional National Legislative Assembly that are fervently serving the people. President Salva Kiir launched the National Dialogue to complement the agreement while the revitalized peace process was underway. The National Dialogue followed a bottom-up approach, conducting grassroots consultation that covers all the regions in the country and articulated the views and recommendations from the people on the South Sudan they would like to see and of a government that would be serving them. The President received the report of the National Dialogue in May 2021 and pledged to implement its recommendations. The same recommendations are providing the foundation as we embark on the process of developing our first ever Constitution. Mr. President, the revitalized agreement and national dialogue are necessary historical steps in our country's quest for peace, but we are still far from building a nation that can provide essential services and development for our people. As national leaders, we admittedly have occurred mistakes that may have disappointed our friends, supporters, and the world. We have learned from those mistakes, and I am here to engage in constructive dialogue with our international partners, bearing in mind the lessons and consequences of our actions, and more importantly, the dreams, aspirations, and marching order from our people of the kind of government, society that they want. Permit me to highlight some key points on our efforts to bring about much needed peace, security, and development to our people. First, I would like to acknowledge that although our independence was product of the struggle and sacrifices of our people, we could not have won without the political and material support from our friends, allies, and partners from around the world. We are deeply grateful to them. Second, I want to assure our friends and partners that we are determined to never go back to war. We pledge to pursue the promises our liberators made to our people. We must ensure peace, security, dignity for all without distinction. We must replace the destruction of war with the productive use of our vast natural resources and national assets for good of our people. Third, we fully realize that the responsibility for pursuing this vision is our own as a people. We believe that the partnership we seek can only be accomplished through constructive, mutually beneficial engagements. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, the failure to fulfill the promises of our struggle is due to objective reasons for which our partners and ourselves must cooperate in finding practical solutions. While there should be no doubt about goodwill of President Salva Kiir and the government he leads to secure peace and the establishment of a just, peaceful, inclusive, and prosperous South Sudan, we need to identify and address the objective reasons for these failures. President Kiir has recently stated that it is now time to correct the past mistakes and open a new page for building a better future of peace, development, and prosperity for our people. Mr. President, we should recall that at our independence, the international community pledged to help build the capacity of our infant country in all areas of nation building. As a result, the United Nations mission in South Sudan, UNMISS, was created to help establish the foundations of our new nation. However, after the outbreak of war, that vision was abandoned, and priority was placed on protecting civilians and providing humanitarian assistance. As a result, support for capacity building of the state was terminated. The protection of civilians is a priority. As the Vice President responsible for the humanitarian cluster in our government, I champion this cause, but it should not be at the expense of capacity building and sustainable development. Building state capacities to govern responsibly and effectively is essential. It is also necessary to guard against the unintended consequences of dependency on humanitarian assistance. With the constant improvement in peace security, it is time to transition from emergency and place our efforts to resetting the Sustainable Development Agenda. The development of the revitalized National Development Strategy is the government of South Sudan's clear and deliberate roadmap to accelerating the implementation of our axis while laying the foundations of sustainable peace and the stabilization of our economy. It is a painful and shameful situation for a country endowed with vast fertile land to be regarded as poor. We must ensure peace and security in the country and double our efforts to support our people who wanted to return and are returning to their areas of origin, for them to participate fully in nation building and contribute to bringing food security in the country. At the core of our efforts are the youth. South Sudan is a young and youthful country, and we call on our partners to help us in our continuing efforts to develop the skills of women and youth, providing them with jobs and livelihood opportunities, and harnessing their energy and productive capacity to provide an alternative to picking up the gun again and engaging in destructive behavior. I am glad to note that encouraging steps have recently been taken in this direction. For example, our security forces and their UNMISS counterparts have begun to promote rural peace and security. We are soon unveiling a national youth service program and setting up a youth empowerment fund in partnership with the United Nations Development Program and other partners. The government welcomes and appreciates such fruitful and positive engagements. To fulfill the vision of our liberation struggle, we must use our oil revenues to fuel economic growth through investment in agriculture. We will invest in infrastructure to connect our rural communities to the markets. We need the public and private sectors, including foreign investors, to join hands in turning South Sudan's potential wealth into a reality. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, I am glad to report on the implementation of the various chapters of the agreement. We have formed executive and legislative organs at the national and state levels, in line with power sharing formulas in Chapter 1 of the agreement. More importantly, we have made significant progress in implementing public financial management reforms in Chapter 4. These measures have met the expectation of international financial institutions and other external partners. In addition, the constitution-making process has recently taken a significant steps forward, and with convening a workshop that charted a roadmap towards the drafting and adoption of their permanent constitution. Towards drafting and adoption of the permanent constitution, the implementation of Chapter 5 on transitional justice, accountability, reconciliation, and healing is moving forward at a relative slow pace. This is not for lack of political will, but rather for objective reasons that are addressing with our regional and international partners. We can therefore say that the glass is half full in the implementation of most chapters of the revitalized peace agreement. Where the glass remains half empty is in Chapter 2 on a permanent ceasefire and transitional security arrangements. There is an urgent need to form a unified professional army under one command and control. The security sector reform is the most challenging part of the agreement, as it contains elements at the center of the violent conflicts in the country. The parties to the agreement and other stakeholders should continue dialogue to build the mutual understanding and confidence needed to address and resolve long-standing differences. Building sustainable peace requires inclusivity, collective investment, determination, diligence, and patience. Mr. President, having celebrated the 10th anniversary of independence this year, the next decade, the United Nations Decade of Action to deliver on the SDGs by 2030, is an opportune moment that coincides with our efforts to develop the country's economy by investing in agriculture. Moreover, with the youth estimated at 73.6% of the population, the government promises to leverage women and young people's contribution to agriculture and economic development. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, climate change has already impacted the lives of at least 1 million people across South Sudan. Torrential rains have resulted in the worst flooding in 60 years and have inundated villages and towns and destroyed livestock. South Sudan has developed and submitted its second nationally determined contribution, which lays out the framework of the country's string commitments to Paris Agreement and its contribution to the global effort to reduce emission to below 1.5 degrees Celsius, despite the country already having amongst the lowest carbon emission. The NDC not only places the country towards a sustainable low-carbon growth pathway, but also developed its resilience against climate-induced shocks and stresses. South Sudan is contributing more than its fair share in reducing global emissions. Yet it is amongst the countries that is suffering the most from the impact of climate change. We call upon member states to aggressively respond to the call for action to further cut emissions if we are to avert catastrophic situation that will be a defining moment for mankind. South Sudan stands ready to help the world, and this is to our national interest, as we have the natural resources and capacity to enhance climate mitigation and adaptation measures. However, funding these measures is essential, and so we join the call to make climate finance accessible to developing countries to enable us to help the world more while also preventing climate change impacts from revising our developmental gains and increasing the vulnerability of our people and country from shocks and stresses. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, I am happy to report that bilateral relationship between South Sudan and Sudan has significantly improved. We have cooperated effectively to resolve our national problems, positively reinforcing our mutual relationship. There are, however, issues that still need to be resolved between our two countries. First and foremost is the issue of the contested area of Abyei. The Abyei Protocol of CPA already states the basis for resolving this issue. Unfortunately, we disagree on the implementation of the Abyei Protocol and have entered into several additional agreements without a final solution. Now Khartoum has called for the withdrawal of the Ethiopian forces in the United Nations Interim Security Force in Abyei. Any alternative arrangements will take time and leave a dangerous security gap in the area. This issue can be resolved peacefully through an arrangement that will give Abyei people their freedom and dignity. Moreover, that will enable them to play a positive role at the border between the two Sudans. We are determined to learn from the past and look forward to engaging in a constructive dialogue, revitalize cooperation, and being more effective in pursuing our shared objectives. We must make the revitalized peace agreement succeed, and we can only do that with support of our regional and international partners. Simply stated, South Sudan desires and is ready to turn a new page. Last, Mr. President, distinguished delegates, I have come to this assembly with the spirit of my late husband, Dr. John Garang de Mabur, and all those who paid the ultimate price in the struggle. It was a dream for Dr. John to liberate his people and address the global community at this very podium. Being here as a female vice president from an independent South Sudan realized Dr. John's dream. Thank you, Mr. President and distinguished delegates, for this opportunity and your attention.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank Her Excellency Rebecca Nyandeng de Mabur, Vice President of the Republic of South Sudan, for her statement, and I request protocol to escort Her Excellency. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Armenia to introduce an address by the head of government.
I have the honor to introduce the pre-recorded statement by His Excellency Nikol Pashinyan, the Prime Minister of the Republic of Armenia.
Honorable President of the General Assembly, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to once again deliver a statement at the United Nations General Assembly. First of all, I would like to congratulate Mr. Abdullah Shahid on his election as President of the General Assembly, as well as Mr. Antonio Guterres on his re-election as Secretary General of the United Nations. I am confident that with your leadership, you will help us overcome the vast challenges we are facing. Today in my speech, I would like to refer to the situation in the South Caucasus region, present our views and proposals on the solution of the existing problems. As you know, in the fall of 2020, Nagorno-Karabakh was subjected to aggression. The war that lasted 44 days took the lives of several thousands of people. Tens of thousands of residents of Nagorno-Karabakh were displaced. The aggression was accompanied by numerous gross violations of international law by the Azerbaijani armed forces, including deliberate targeting of civilians and vital infrastructure, extrajudicial killings of prisoners of war and civilian hostages, torture, and many other documented crimes. As a result of these actions, the Armenian people were subjected to complete ethnic cleansing in the parts of Nagorno-Karabakh which came under the control of Azerbaijan. Unfortunately, the international community here again could not prevent the mass atrocities. Today, no Armenian lives or practically could live in the territories under the control of Azerbaijan. Thanks to the mediation efforts of the Russian Federation, it was possible to stop the bloodshed. On November 9, a trilateral ceasefire statement was signed. Peacekeeping forces of the Russian Federation were deployed in Nagorno-Karabakh, which today ensures stability and security there. Dear colleagues, 1 month ago, the Republic of Armenian National Assembly approved the government's action plan for 2021-2026, where one of the key provisions is to open an era of peaceful development for our country and the region. Moreover, as per the results of the early parliamentary election held on June 20, 2021, the people of Armenia gave to our government a mandate to move towards this key goal. It should be emphasized that our government received this important mandate based on the results of elections that were held to overcome the domestic political crisis. This was the second election in our country after the non-violent Velvet People's Revolution in Armenia in 2018. Both elections were assessed by international observers as competitive, transparent, and in line with democratic standards. So, how are we going to achieve the goal of opening an era of peaceful development for our country and the region? Through dialogue, overcoming incrementally the atmosphere of painful hostility in our region. We realize that the path will be difficult and long. Unfortunately, the incidents designed to delegitimize the peace agenda and deepen and institutionalize the atmosphere of hostility currently occur on a daily basis. Violations of the ceasefire, aggressive and insulting statements against Armenia and the Armenian people continue to escalate the atmosphere. An act against the peace agenda is the fact that, contrary to Article 8 of the November 9 statement, Azerbaijan not only still holds several dozen citizens of the Republic of Armenia in captivity, but also has sentenced many of them to 6 to 20 years of imprisonment on trumped-up charges. In addition, there are citizens whose captivity fact has not yet been confirmed by Azerbaijan, although there is clear evidence that they are in captivity. This becomes even more unacceptable against the background that, in the fall of 2020, Azerbaijani internet users posted videos of the capture of specific Armenian soldiers and later that decapitated or shot bodies of these soldiers were discovered. We have irrefutable evidence that our captives have been tortured. An outrageous example of the deepening of the atmosphere of hostility is the opening in Baku of the so-called Park of Trophies, where Azerbaijani schoolchildren are taken on excursions to watch the mannequins of captured, killed or bleeding Armenian soldiers. These and other steps are taken to demonstrate the impossibility of peace in our region.